The crossroads come into view just as the last direct light of the sun slips below the far ridge, leaving a sky that shifts from pale gold to a deep, even grey blue. You approach along the King's Road from the west, your boots meeting the packed earth with a soft, steady rhythm that you have come to know as well as your own breathing. Ahead, at the junction where a narrower lane branches off toward the forest, a single figure stands with a musket resting at his side. He sees you from a distance, and you see him, the two of you exchanging a silent acknowledgement that requires no gesture. The road is otherwise empty, a pale ribbon of dirt and crushed stone stretching away to the east and south, bordered by low grasses and the occasional dark shape of a hedge. The air carries the cool, clean scent of evening, a blend of dry earth and the faintest hint of wood smoke from some unseen cottage chimney miles away. You reach the post and stop a few paces from the other musketeer, a man whose name you know but whom you address simply with a quiet nod. He returns it, his face barely visible under the wide brim of his hat. His voice, when it comes, is low and unhurried, a murmur that blends with the rustle of the breeze through the tall grass. All is quiet, he says, and nothing has stirred on the road since the last cart passed an hour before sunset. You accept this information without comment, because it is exactly what you expected to hear. He shifts the musket slightly, transferring its weight from one hand to the other, and then he is gone. His footsteps fading into the gathering dusk until you can no longer separate the sound from the general softness of the evening. Now the post is yours, and you are alone with the long musket, the crossbelt, and the blue tabard that marks you as a king's musketeer. You let the stillness settle around you like a familiar cloak, taking the time to adjust the position of your feet on the ground until you feel the slight unevenness of the road's surface through your soles. The earth here is packed hard by years of wheels, hooves, and the tread of countless boots, and you stand exactly where the previous guard stood, on a patch worn smooth and flat. A single signpost rises from the weeds of the crossroads, its wooden arm pointing west toward the town and east toward the next province. Its lettering too faint to read in this light. You know what it says anyway. You have stood here before, on other nights, and the geography of this place is as familiar as the layout of your own quarters. The musket is a long, solid presence in your hands. You hold it not with tension, but with a relaxed, practiced ease, the butt resting against the ground while your fingers curl loosely around the barrel and stock. The wood is smooth from years of handling, its grain darkened by oil from countless palms, and you can feel the subtle warmth left by the last guard's grip still radiating faintly from the surface. You run your thumb slowly along the side of the stock, tracing the shallow curve where the wood meets the brass fittings, a gesture that serves no purpose other than to occupy your senses in the quiet. The flintlock mechanism sits snugly in its housing, the hammer resting forward in the safe position, and you check it without urgency, more out of habit than necessity. You half-cock the hammer, feel the slight resistance of the spring, then ease it back down. The metal is cool and slightly rough under your fingertip. Everything is as it should be. Above you, the sky continues its slow transformation. The deep grey blue begins to deepen further, taking on the first hints of true indigo overhead, while the western horizon retains a faint, lingering band of ochre that will soon be gone. You watch the last of the daylight drain away with the patience of someone who has no reason to hurry. A single cloud, thin and stretched out like a wisp of wool, hangs motionless in the upper air, catching the final rays of sun for a brief moment before it turns silver and then merges with the darkening background. The road, too, changes with the fading light. The pale surface that had seemed almost white during the afternoon now takes on a muted grey tone, and the ruts left by cartwheels become shallow shadows that streak its length. You note these changes not as separate observations, but as parts of a single smooth transition that carries the world from day into night. The air cools steadily, dropping degree by degree as the ground releases the warmth it stored during the sunlit hours. You feel it first on your cheeks and the backs of your hands, a gentle chill that contrasts with the residual heat trapped in your woolen tabard. Your breath, when you exhale, forms the faintest ghost of vapor, that vanishes almost before you can see it. You shift your weight slightly from one foot to the other, a minor adjustment that keeps your body comfortable without breaking the overall stillness of your posture. The grasses on either side of the road whisper to each other in a breeze that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a sound so constant that it quickly becomes a backdrop, indistinguishable from the silence itself. You listen to it without actively listening, letting it wash over you like the hum of a distant, untroubled sea. A few stars begin to appear, tiny points of light that prick the dark fabric of the sky one by one. You notice the first one directly overhead, a bright, steady speck that emerges while the rest of the sky is still mostly empty. Then another appears to the east, and another, until you can pick out the familiar shape of the constellation that the old soldiers call the plough, its handle curving gently toward the horizon. The stars do not hurry. They simply become present, as if they had been waiting behind the blue all along, and only now reveal themselves at their own measured pace. You watch this process with the same calm attention you give to the road, acknowledging each new point of light as it arrives without counting them or forming any particular thoughts about them. The moon has not yet risen, and for a long while the only illumination comes from these distant suns, so far away that their light feels like a cold, ancient whisper against your skin. Your crossbelt presses diagonally across your chest, a broad strip of leather that supports the weight of your sidearm and powder flask. You can feel its familiar pressure with every breath, a constant, reassuring reminder of your equipment's presence. The leather has been softened by years of wear and regular oiling, and it no longer creaks or chafes, simply resting against your tunic with a gentle, even weight. The powder flask, a brass vessel shaped like a flattened pear, hangs at your hip and occasionally catches a faint glimmer from the emerging starlight. You sometimes touch it with your free hand, letting your fingertips glide over the cool metal and the small, tight-fitting stopper, checking that it is secure. It is, of course, secure. You checked it before you left the barracks, and you will check it again before the watch is over. A sequence of small, calming rituals that fill the hours without urgency. The road itself demands nothing of you. It stretches away to the east, its surface disappearing into the darkness about 100 paces from where you stand, swallowed by the night and the distance. To the south, the narrower lane leads toward a small cluster of farmhouses that you cannot see from here, their existence known only through memory and the occasional daytime sound of a dog barking or a rooster crowing. Now, there is only the deep, unbroken quiet of the countryside at night, a quiet so complete that you can hear the soft sound of your own blinking if you pay close enough attention. The air carries no voices, no wheels, no footsteps. Even the insects seem to have paused, waiting for the moon or some other signal to resume their nightly chorus. You stand at the center of this silence, and the silence, in turn, stands with you. Time passes without markers, its passage measured only by the gradual movement of the stars across the sky and the slow cooling of the metal parts of your musket. You become aware of the faint scent of hay drifting from the direction of the farm lane, a dry, sweet smell that mingles with the earthiness of the road and the clean sharpness of the night air. The smell reminds you in a distant, gentle way of the stables behind the barracks, where the horses stand in their stalls through the long nights, shifting their weight and blowing softly through their noses. You spent many hours in those stables, brushing the rough coats of the horses and feeling the warm, heavy solidity of their bodies. The memory passes through your mind without leaving a ripple, a quiet visitor that arrives and departs without disturbing the surface of your thoughts. Your eyes have fully adjusted to the darkness now, and you can see the faint outlines of the landscape with surprising clarity. The hedge that marked the edge of a field to the north becomes a dark, textured mass, its leaves rustling with a sound like paper being slowly shuffled. Beyond the hedge, the field itself is a flat expanse of muted grey, its surface broken only by the occasional low silhouette of a haystack or a solitary tree. The tree stands alone, its branches spreading out in a shape that is almost perfectly symmetrical, and you find yourself occasionally glancing toward it as a kind of anchor for your vision, a stable point in the shifting shadows. The tree, of course, does not move. It simply exists, much as you exist, rooted and patient. You walk a slow, measured circuit of the crossroads, your boots making a soft, rhythmic crunch on the gravel that gathers in the low spots of the road. 10 paces to the east, where the road begins its gentle slope upward, you stop and look back toward the signpost, noting how your own silhouette would appear to anyone approaching from that direction. Then 10 paces back, past the post, and 10 more to the west, where the road levels out and the view opens onto the distant, barely visible line of the forest. Each segment of this small patrol takes exactly the same amount of time, and your steps fall into a steady, unhurried cadence that you could maintain for hours without fatigue. The gravel underfoot shifts slightly with each step, producing a sound that is neither loud nor intrusive, a low, crumbling noise that settles back into silence the moment you stop. You return to the center of the crossroads and stand still again, your patrol complete, your presence re-established exactly where it began. The flintlock mechanism, which you checked earlier, continues to rest quietly against the stock, and you find yourself revisiting the small, precise motions of that check in your mind. You picture the smooth, dark surface of the frizzen, the sharp edge at the flint held tight in the leather clamp, the tiny powder pan that sits clean and dry beneath the cover. You know the weight of the trigger pull, the exact amount of pressure required to release the hammer, though you have no intention of testing it now. The knowledge is simply there, part of the deep ingrained familiarity you have with this weapon, a familiarity that allows you to carry it without thinking, as naturally as you carry your own arm. The musket is not a threat, it is a tool, and tonight it serves primarily as a companion to your stillness. The wind shifts slightly, turning more from the north, and with it comes a subtle change in the air's texture. It feels drier, carrying a hint of the open fields and the far-off chalk downs that lie beyond the forest. The grasses respond with a slightly louder whisper, a collective sigh that runs through the roadside vegetation in a single, sweeping wave. You turn your head just enough to feel the breeze on the other side of your face, letting it cool the skin that had been protected by the angle of your hat. The plume on your hat, a simple white feather, stirs gently, its tip tracing a small, lazy circle in the air. You watch it for a moment, then return your gaze to the road. Despite the darkness, the road retains a faint, almost phosphorescent quality, as if it has stored a memory of the day's sunlight and now releases it slowly back into the night. This phenomenon is something you have noticed before on nights without a moon, a subtle luminance that makes the road's path visible even from a distance. It allows you to see that the road remains empty, that no new shadows have appeared, that nothing has disturbed the ordinary geometry of the crossroads. The signpost, too, stands in its familiar spot, its wooden arm pointing faithfully toward the invisible destinations that no traveler will seek until morning. You find a quiet satisfaction in this emptiness, a sense that the world is orderly and at peace, and that your presence is a small, unremarkable part of that order. You think, briefly, of the other guards stationed at other crossroads and bridges across the region, each one standing just as you stand, each one watching an empty road or a dark river, each one a single, still point in a network of vigilance that covers the entire province. The thought is not a complex one. It is more like a gentle awareness of connection, a recognition that your solitude is shared by unseen others who are, at this moment, also feeling the cool air on their faces and the solid weight of their muskets. You do not know their names, and they do not know yours, but the rhythm of the watch is something you all hold in common, a slow, unspoken pulse that beats through the night. The first hour of your watch passes in this way, without incident, without alarm. You do not count the minutes because counting would imply a desire for the watch to end, and you have no such desire. The night is simply here, and you are in it, and the road remains empty under the slowly turning sky. A faint high-pitched chirp begins to sound from the grass at the roadside, the first tentative call of a cricket or a similar small creature, testing the silence. It chirps once, pauses, chirps again, and then is joined by another and another, until a soft, rhythmic chorus establishes itself in the undergrowth, a steady, pulsing sound that rises and falls in a gentle, wave-like pattern. You listen to it as you might listen to the breathing of a sleeping companion, finding in its regularity a kind of comfort. Your mind drifts, as it often does during the long watches, to the simple mundane details of your daily life. You recall the morning's breakfast, a bowl of coarse bread soaked in warm milk, and the way the bread softened and broke apart under the spoon. You recall the orderly rows of muskets in the armory, each one cleaned and oiled and resting in its designated slot, the brass fittings gleaming faintly in the light from the small high windows. You recall the sound of the barracks door closing with a soft, solid thud, the latch dropping into place with a click that you have heard 1,000 times. These memories do not come as a story. They are simply images, quiet and still, passing before your inner eye like the slow turning of pages in a book that you have read many times before. The cricket song continues, and beneath it, you can now hear the very distant murmur of the brook that runs through the bottom of the meadow to the south. It is a sound so faint that you sometimes think you are imagining it, a low, liquid rustle that blends with the breeze and the crickets until you can no longer separate the three. The brook is a place you have visited in daylight, a narrow stream of clear, cold water that flows over a bed of smooth stones and watercress. Now in the darkness, it is only a sound, a constant, soothing presence that reminds you of the land's quiet, unceasing activity, the way water always finds its way downhill, no matter the hour. You adjust your grip on the musket, shifting it to your other hand with a slow, deliberate motion. The stock feels slightly cooler now against your palm, having given up the last of the previous guard's warmth to the night air. You settle it against your shoulder, its weight immediately familiar and comfortable, and you let your free hand fall to your side, where it brushes against the coarse fabric of your cassock. The wool is thick and tightly woven, dyed a deep blue that appears almost black in the starlight, and it holds your body heat close, insulating you against the creeping chill. You are neither too warm nor too cold, existing in a state of perfect physical equilibrium that makes the watch feel effortless. Overhead, a few more stars have appeared, filling in the gaps between the earlier arrivals, until the sky is a dense, glittering field of lights. You can see the faint, milky band of the great celestial river that cuts across the heavens from horizon to horizon, its glow so soft that it seems more like a suggestion than a reality. You look at it for a long time, letting your eyes trace its path without any particular aim, simply following the curve of its brightness as it winds among the constellations. The night sky above you is vast and ancient and utterly indifferent, and that indifference is in its own way deeply restful. It asks nothing of you and offers nothing in return except the simple, steady presence of its countless stars. The road remains empty. You watch it with a calm, unfocused gaze, not staring at any one point, but taking in the whole scene at once. The ruts and stones, the low weeds, the signpost, the dark mass of the hedge, the distant tree, the sky above it, all these elements form a single, unchanging composition that you hold in your awareness, like a painting. Nothing moves except the breeze, and even that is so gentle that it barely stirs the leaves. The night has settled fully now, and you with it, a musketeer standing watch on the King's Road, alone but not lonely, still but not idle, simply present in the deep, quiet dark. The moon begins its appearance not with a sudden brightness, but with a subtle, growing glow behind the dark line of the eastern tree line, a soft illumination that seems to seep upward from the earth itself. You notice it first as a faint lightening of the sky just above the trees, a pale, silvery wash that gradually replaces the deep indigo with something softer, like watered milk spreading slowly through dark water. The stars in that part of the sky begin to fade, their points of light dissolving into the increasing brightness, and you watch this process with the same quiet patience you have maintained since taking your post. The air cools a little more, as it often does when the moon begins to rise, and you feel the change on your skin as a gentle, fleeting chill that passes and then settles into a new, stable temperature. The breeze, still gentle from the north, carries the faint scent of dry grass and distant chalk, unchanged by the moon's arrival, but somehow more noticeable now that the light is changing. The first sliver of the moon itself appears above the tree line after a long, gradual brightening of the sky, a curved edge of brilliant white gold that seems impossibly clean and sharp against the dark tangle of branches. It rises slowly, so slowly that you cannot perceive its movement from one moment to the next, yet over a span of minutes, the crescent becomes a half circle, and the half circle becomes a full, round disk that frees itself from the horizon and begins its long, slow climb into the open sky. The moon is full tonight, a perfect circle of pale light that dominates the eastern heavens, and its face is marked with the familiar grey patterns that some say resemble a man carrying sticks or a woman spinning thread. You do not think about these shapes now, you simply observe the way the moon's surface seems smooth and textured at the same time, its brightness so intense that it hurts to look directly at it for more than a few heartbeats. The light reaches the road before you fully expect it, a gradual silver tide that flows across the fields and touches the dusty surface of the King's Road with a gentle, transformative hand. You watch as the pale, almost luminous grey of the road begins to change, its colour shifting from a muted slate to something more like tarnished silver, a cool, reflective tone that catches the moonlight and sends it back into the night in soft, diffuse rays. The ruts left by cartwheels become more visible now, not as harsh shadows, but as delicate, elongated lines of deeper silver that streak the road's length like the grain in a piece of old wood. Small stones embedded in the packed earth, pebbles that were invisible in the starlight, now appear as tiny islands of brightness, their surfaces catching the moon's glow and holding it like tiny, polished mirrors. You notice all of this without consciously cataloguing it, your eyes simply receiving the new information as the world around you shifts from one kind of darkness to another, more illuminated kind. The signpost at the crossroads undergoes its own quiet transformation. You have been standing near it for some time now, and you know its shape intimately. The rough-hewn wooden post set deep into the ground, the single crosspiece pointing west and east, the faint, weathered letters that spell out destinations you have memorized. In the moonlight, the signpost becomes a thing of sharp contrasts, its sun-bleached wood turning a pale silvery grey, while the shadows it casts stretch long and black across the road. You look at the shadow as it lies upon the dirt, a perfect, elongated replica of the post and its arm, and you notice that it moves. The movement is so slow that it is almost imperceptible, a creeping, minute rotation that follows the moon's arc across the sky. Over the course of many minutes, the shadow shifts its position by the width of a finger, then another, the darkness sliding across the road's surface with a patience that matches your own. You find yourself glancing at the shadow occasionally, using it as a kind of silent timepiece, marking the night's progress by the gentle crawl of darkness over earth. The moonlight also alters the quality of the fields on either side of the road. Before the moon rose, the fields were dark, undifferentiated expanses of muted grey, their textures hidden and their shapes defined only by the faintest outlines of hedges and lone trees. Now the fields become a calm sea of silver and soft grey, the grasses and crops taking on a luminous quality that makes them seem almost liquid, as if the land itself has been covered by a shallow, motionless flood. The haystacks that dot the northern field stand out as low, rounded hills of darker silver, their shadows pooling on the side away from the moon like patches of deep, quiet water. The lone tree you noticed earlier, the one with the symmetrical branches, now appears as a delicate, intricate silhouette against the bright sky, its every branch and twig defined in perfect clarity, a dark, lace-like pattern that seems almost too detailed to be real. You look at that tree for a long moment, appreciating the stillness of its form, the way it anchors the landscape and provides a fixed point amid the shimmering, shifting light. Your own clothing and equipment respond to the moonlight in subtle, satisfying ways. The blue wool of your cassock, so dark in the starlight that it seemed almost black, now reveals its true color in the silver illumination, a deep muted blue that looks like the sky just after sunset, rich and calm. The silver cross embroidered on your tabard catches the light directly, its threads glowing with a cool, steady brilliance that makes it the brightest thing on your person. You glance down at it, occasionally, watching the way the light plays over the intricate stitching, the tiny highlights that appear and disappear as you shift your weight. The brass fittings on your musket also shine in the moonlight, the trigger guard, the ramrod pipes, and the small decorative plate on the stock, all gleaming with a soft golden-silver sheen that contrasts beautifully with the dark wood. The barrel itself reflects a long, thin line of light along its upper edge, a straight, unwavering stripe of brightness that runs from the muzzle to the lock. You run a fingertip along that line, feeling the cold, smooth metal and the faint, greasy residue of the oil you applied earlier in the day, and you find the sensation grounding, a small tactile connection to the reality of your watch. Your own shadow joins the landscape now, a dark, elongated version of yourself that stretches westward across the road. You watch it with mild, detached interest as it mimics your posture, the long musket forming a thin black line beside a thicker, darker shape that is your body, the wide brim of your hat creating a distorted oval that merges with the shadow of your head. When you shift your weight or adjust your grip, the shadow moves in perfect synchrony, a silent, faithful echo. You take a few slow steps to the east, and the shadow follows, its length changing slightly as the angle of the light shifts, its darkness deepening where it falls across the dusty road, and fading where it stretches onto the darker grass. When you return to your post, the shadow settles back into its familiar place, and you are once again a still, vertical figure with a dark, horizontal twin that patiently accompanies you through the night. The moonlight reaches the small details of the crossroads that you had overlooked in the earlier darkness. You notice, for the first time this night, the tiny white flowers that grow in the cracks of the signpost's base, their petals closed tightly against the cold but still catching the light, like small pale beads. You see the delicate strands of a spider's web strung between two low weeds near the edge of the road, its silk threads transformed by the moon into a fragile, glistening lacework of silver lines, perfectly still and perfectly intact. A small beetle, dark and glossy, makes its slow way across a stone near your foot, its shell reflecting a pinpoint of light that moves as it moves, a tiny, ambulatory star navigating the vast landscape of the road. These small lives, so easily ignored in the daylight, now become part of your quiet awareness, adding depth and texture to the night without demanding your attention. The quality of the moonlight changes subtly as the moon climbs higher. When it first rose, the light was a warm, almost golden silver, tinged with the faint remnants of the sun's indirect glow. Now, as the moon reaches a point well above the tree line, its light becomes cooler, more purely silver, a clear, crisp illumination that sharpens every edge and deepens every shadow. The world around you loses its grey ambiguity and becomes a stark composition of black and silver, a monochrome landscape rendered in high contrast. The road is a bright, pale band, the hedges are dark, solid masses, the fields are luminous, shimmering expanses, the sky is a deep, velvety black that makes the moon seem even brighter by comparison. You find a quiet beauty in this simplicity, a sense that the night has been distilled into its essential elements, and you are a part of that distillation, a dark figure in a silver world. You breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of your breath to the slow drift of the moon across the sky. It is not a conscious decision, but rather a natural alignment, your lungs expanding and contracting at a pace that feels in harmony with the celestial movement above you. Inhale, the moon inches higher. Exhale, it seems to pause, suspended. Inhale again, it continues its steady, inevitable climb. This rhythm is deeply soothing, a slow biological clock that ticks in time with the cosmos, and you let it carry you through the minutes without effort, your thoughts becoming as smooth and untroubled as the moon's own path. The night sounds continue their quiet, unobtrusive presence around you, unchanged by the moonlight, but perhaps more noticeable now that the landscape has been visually transformed. The crickets maintain their gentle, pulsing chorus from the grass, a soft, rhythmic trilling that rises and falls in volume as the breeze shifts. The distant brook, still audible as a low liquid murmur, seems to have found a slightly different note, a deeper, more resonant tone that you attribute to the cooling of the water, or perhaps simply to the way sound travels differently in the moonlit air. An owl calls once from the forest edge, a single low hoot that hangs in the air for a long moment before dissolving, leaving behind a silence that feels even deeper than before. You listen to these sounds with a relaxed, open attention, letting them come and go without grasping at them, as if they were leaves floating on the surface of a slow-moving stream. You walk another small circuit of the crossroads, your boots crunching softly on the moonlit gravel. The sound is different now, you think, sharper and more distinct in the cool, dense air, each footstep a clear, isolated event that fades quickly into the night. The gravel itself glints under the moon, the tiny facets of crushed stone catching the light and sparkling like a scattering of coarse, dull diamonds. You walk to the eastern end of the crossroads, where the road begins its gentle rise, and you stop to look back at the signpost and the long shadow it casts. From this angle, the shadow points almost directly toward you, a dark, elongated arrow that connects the post to your position, a line drawn across the earth in pure absence of light. You find the geometry of it pleasing, the way the 3 points, the post, the shadow's tip, and your own feet form a neat, invisible triangle. Then you walk back, completing the circuit, and the shadow shifts its position slightly, as if to acknowledge your movement. The moon's reflection appears in the most unexpected places. A small puddle of water that you had not noticed before, a shallow depression in the road's surface left by a recent rain, now holds a perfect miniature moon, a bright round disk that trembles only when the breeze touches the water's surface. You pause beside it, looking down at the reflected sky, and you see that the puddle also contains a tiny reflection of yourself, a dark shape with a wide hat and a long, thin line that must be your musket. The image is so small and so fleeting that it feels like a secret, a private, parallel world existing just beneath your feet, and you step away carefully so as not to disturb it. The puddle remains still, its captured moon shining on long after you have returned to your post. Time continues its slow, unmarked passage. The moon climbs higher still, and its light becomes even more vertical, falling almost straight down onto the crossroads so that shadows shrink and details become sharper. You notice how the texture of the road's surface, once a uniform grey, now reveals countless tiny variations. A patch of slightly lighter earth where a cart spilled a load of sand months ago. A series of small, parallel scratches left by a dragged branch. The faint, horseshoe-shaped impressions of a horse that passed this way during the day. Each of these marks tells a story, but you do not feel the need to read them. You simply acknowledge their existence as part of the fabric of the place, a record of ordinary, uneventful traffic that has worn itself into the ground. Your mind drifts again, this time to the moon itself, its distant, airless surface, and the old tales the veteran musketeers tell in the barracks about the seas and mountains that are said to exist there. You picture those imagined landscapes in your mind's eye. Vast grey plains of dust, sharp peaks that cast no shadows, silent craters that have remained unchanged for millions of years. The thought is so far removed from your current reality that it feels almost like a dream, a gentle, abstract wander through a geography that no one will ever visit, and it settles your mind even further, smoothing out the last wrinkles of waking thought until your consciousness is as smooth and featureless as the imaginary lunar plains. The night is now at its deepest, most tranquil point. The road is empty, the sky is clear, the moon is full, and you are a single, still musketeer standing at the center of a silver world, a world that asks nothing of you except your presence. You give that presence willingly, without reservation, and in return you receive a profound, quiet peace that fills every corner of your being. Your breathing is slow, your hands are steady on the musket, your eyes are half-lidded against the brightness, and the entire universe seems to have contracted to this one small crossroads, this one patch of moonlit earth, this one moment of perfect, enduring stillness. The moon continues its slow arc overhead, and you continue to watch, patient and calm, as the silver light washes over the King's Road and the long, gentle night wears on. The deep night arrives without announcement, a gradual thickening of the darkness that has less to do with the absence of light than with the quality of the silence itself. The moon still rides high in the sky, its silver disk so bright that you can read the faint grey patterns on its surface, but your eyes have grown accustomed to the illumination, and the landscape, once so vividly transformed by the moon's arrival, now settles into a steady, unchanging presence that no longer demands your visual attention. The road, the hedges, the distant tree, the fields, these have become familiar companions, their shapes fixed in your awareness, and you find that you no longer need to look at them directly to know they are there. Your gaze softens, your eyelids grow heavy but not sleepy, and your attention turns inward toward the quieter, more subtle realm of sound that has been waiting beneath the visual surface all along. The night, you discover, is not silent at all, but filled with a gentle, constant chorus that you can now hear with a clarity that surprises you, as if a veil has been lifted from your ears. The first sound you notice, now that you are truly listening, is the wind. It is not a single, unified wind, but a collection of small, separate breezes that move through the different elements of the landscape with distinct voices, each one contributing its own note to the overall texture. Through the tall grass beside the road, the wind makes a soft, shushing sound, a prolonged whisper that rises and falls in volume as the blades bend and straighten, a sound that you have heard since you arrived but have only now begun to appreciate as a continuous, lulling presence rather than mere background noise. The grass is dry from the long summer days, and its whisper has a slightly brittle edge, a faint, papery quality that speaks of seed heads and parched stems rubbing together in the dark. You listen to this sound for a while, letting it wash over you like the gentle, rhythmic shushing of a patient mother soothing a restless child, and you find that your breathing begins to match its cadence, slow and easy and without effort. The hedges, in contrast to the grass, produce a deeper, more rustling sound when the wind passes through them, a sound that reminds you of pages being turned in a large, heavy book. The leaves of the hedge are thicker and more leathery than the grass blades, and they do not whisper so much as they murmur, their edges brushing against one another with a soft, dry friction that creates a low, continuous undercurrent beneath the higher shush of the grass. Sometimes, when a slightly stronger puff of air moves through the crossroads, the hedge will respond with a sudden, brief flurry of rustles that quickly subsides, like a conversational aside that interrupts the main narrative before settling back into the steady background murmur. You find this variability pleasing, a small, natural variation that prevents the night from becoming monotonous without ever rising to the level of disturbance. The hedge speaks its quiet language, and you listen without needing to understand, content to let the sounds exist as they are. Beyond the hedge, in the open field, the taller plants and the scattered haystacks interact with the wind in yet another way, producing a sound that is lower and more hollow, almost a soft moan when the breeze catches the edge of a haystack and wraps around it before dissipating. The hay, dry and loosely packed, shifts slightly in response to the air currents, and you can hear the faint settling creaks of the compressed stalks as they readjust their positions. Tiny, sleepy sounds that suggest deep rest and ancient patience. The lone tree, the one with the symmetrical branches, contributes its own voice to the chorus, a higher, more delicate rustle as its leaves, still clinging to the branches, tremble and shiver against one another, creating a sound like distant, gentle rain. You stand at the center of all these wind sounds, surrounded by a circle of soft, natural music that envelops you completely, and you feel a deep, quiet connection to the land, as if you have become part of its breathing, a single, still point in a world of gentle motion. Beneath the wind sounds, or perhaps woven through them so seamlessly that you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins, runs the constant, liquid murmur of the distant brook. You have been aware of the brook since the early hours of the night, but now, with your ears attuned to the subtle layers of the dark, its voice becomes clearer and more distinct, a low, continuous gurgle that seems to emanate from the very earth itself. The brook is not loud, it is a presence rather than a sound, a steady, unwavering background hum that provides a foundation for all the other, more variable noises. You picture it in your mind's eye, the narrow channel of clear water flowing over its bed of smooth, dark stones, the tiny waterfalls that form where the current encounters a fallen branch or a slight dip in the terrain, each one producing a slightly different note, a slightly different pitch. The combined effect is that of a quiet, improvised melody, a song that has no beginning and no end, a song that has been playing since long before you arrived and will continue playing long after you depart. The brook is the night's steady heartbeat, and you find its constancy deeply reassuring, a reminder that the world moves and flows even in the deepest dark, without hurry, without pause. The insect chorus, which you first noticed earlier in the watch, has now fully established itself, a soft, rhythmic pulsing that rises from the grass and the undergrowth like a gentle vibrating hum. The crickets are the primary musicians, their chirps blending into a continuous trill that seems to come from everywhere at once, a sound so pervasive that it becomes part of the air itself. You can distinguish, if you listen carefully, the individual calls of different insects, the higher, faster chirp of the smaller crickets, the slower, more deliberate click of a beetle somewhere in the hedge, the faint, buzzing whine of a distant moth or night-flying insect moving through the darkness on silent wings. These sounds do not compete with one another. They coexist in a peaceful, layered arrangement, each one occupying its own small niche in the auditory spectrum. The result is a gentle, steady hum that fills the spaces between the wind sounds and the brook's murmur, a living, breathing texture that turns the night into a single, unified field of sound. You listen to it as you might listen to the slow, even breathing of a sleeping companion, finding in its regularity a profound sense of calm. From time to time, the insect chorus is punctuated by the soft, distant call of an owl, a single, low note that drifts across the fields from the direction of the forest, with a melancholy gentleness that never startles but simply arrives and departs like a quiet thought. The hoot is a deep, resonant sound, hollow and round, and it hangs in the air for several seconds after the bird has finished, as if the night itself is reluctant to let it go. You wait, after each call, for a response that sometimes comes and sometimes does not, a second hoot from a different direction, or a softer, more distant echo that might be another owl or might be the first call reflected from the trees. The intervals between calls are unpredictable, stretching from a few heartbeats to many minutes, and this unpredictability keeps your attention gently engaged without ever demanding it, a small irregular pattern that punctuates the steady background hum with quiet, unassuming grace. The owl, like you, is a solitary watcher in the dark, and you feel a quiet kinship with it, two creatures sharing the vastness of the night without intrusion. There are other, smaller sounds that emerge as your listening deepens, sounds that you would never notice during the busy daylight hours, but that now become as clear and distinct as individual instruments in a carefully tuned orchestra. You hear the tiny, dry click of a leaf detaching itself from a branch and falling through the lower foliage to the ground, a sound so faint that it is barely more than a suggestion, a soft, papery whisper that marks the end of a long, slow journey. You hear the subtle settling of the earth itself, the minute creaks and groans of cooling soil and shifting stones that occur as the ground releases the last of the day's stored heat. A deep, subterranean murmur that you feel as much as hear, a vibration that travels up through your boots and into your bones. You hear, very occasionally, the soft, scurrying rustle of a small creature moving through the grass near the hedge, a field mouse or a vole perhaps, its tiny feet producing a sound like the gentle brushing of a whisk against parchment. These sounds are so brief and so soft that they barely register, passing through your awareness like gentle, fleeting ripples on the surface of a still pond, and you let them come and go without grasping. Even your own presence contributes to the night's quiet symphony, and you become aware, as the hours pass, of the small, intimate sounds of your own body and equipment that you usually ignore. You hear the soft, rhythmic whisper of your own breathing, a steady in and out that blends with the wind and the brook, until you can no longer separate it from the natural chorus, your body participating in the night's music as naturally as the grass and the trees. You hear the occasional gentle creak of your crossbelt when you shift your weight, the leather rubbing against the wool of your cassock with a sound like a distant sleepy sigh. The metal fittings on your musket, when touched by a slightly stronger breeze, produce a faint, high-pitched ringing, a delicate, crystalline shimmer that hangs in the air for a brief moment before fading. Even your own heartbeat, when you stand perfectly still and listen with absolute attention, becomes audible as a low, steady thump that pulses deep within your chest, a quiet, reassuring drum that reminds you that you're alive and present in this moment, part of the great, slow rhythm of the night. A distant cart creaks somewhere far down the King's Road, a sound so faint and so far away that you are not entirely certain you heard it at first. A low wooden groan that rises from the eastern horizon and then fades almost immediately, leaving behind a silence that seems deeper than before. You strain your ears, but the sound does not return, and you conclude that it was probably a farm cart making a late journey, its driver unseen and unknown, moving through the darkness with the same slow, patient purpose that defines everything on this road. The thought does not trouble you, it simply passes through your mind like the cart itself passed through the night, a brief, harmless visitor that disturbs nothing and leaves no trace. The road returns to its empty stillness, and you return to your listening, the momentary interruption already forgotten. The quality of the soundscape shifts subtly as the night wears on, responding to changes in temperature and humidity that you can feel on your skin. The air grows slightly damper, a faint hint of dew beginning to form on the grass and the road surface, and this moisture seems to soften the edges of the sounds, rounding them out so that the sharp, brutal quality of the earlier hours gives way to something more mellow and diffuse. The crickets slow their chirping almost imperceptibly, their calls becoming slightly longer and more drawn out, as if the cold is gradually calming their small, energetic bodies. The brook continues its steady murmur, unchanged and unchanging, while the wind sounds become more intermittent, the gusts growing fewer and farther between as the atmosphere settles into the deep, profound stillness of the very late night. The entire auditory world seems to be drawing a long, slow breath, preparing for the eventual transition toward dawn, and you breathe with it, your own rhythm slowing to match the universal deceleration. You find yourself attuning not just to the sounds themselves, but to the spaces between them, the silences that connect one note to the next, and you realize that these silences are not empty at all, but are filled with a deep, resonant presence that is the night's true voice. The pause between two cricket chirps, the gap between the end of one gust of wind and the beginning of the next, the long, quiet interval after the owl calls, before the brook's murmur reasserts itself. These are the moments when you feel most deeply the vastness and the peace of the world, the moments when the night seems to hold its breath and invite you to do the same. You accept the invitation without hesitation, letting your awareness expand into the silence, and in that expansion you experience a sense of unity with everything around you, a quiet, wordless understanding that you are exactly where you are meant to be, doing exactly what you are meant to be, doing exactly what you are meant to do, and that the night will continue to unfold in its own gentle, unhurried way, with or without your participation. The night's breathing, you realize, is a phrase that captures the essence of what you have been experiencing, a slow rhythmic pulse that underlies all the individual sounds and binds them into a coherent, living whole. The earth breathes through the wind and the water, the creatures breathe through their small, busy lives, and you breathe through your quiet, steadfast vigil, all of you part of the same great, sleeping organism that rests and renews itself in the darkness. This thought is not a complex one. It is a simple, intuitive knowing that arises from the depths of your listening and settles into your mind like a smooth, cool stone sinking into still water. You do not analyze it or hold on to it. You simply acknowledge it, and then you return your attention to the present moment, to the soft shush of the grass, the low murmur of the brook, the gentle hum of the insects, and the profound, enveloping silence that holds them all. Time continues its slow, unmarked passage, measured only by the subtle shifts in the soundscape and the gradual progression of the moon across the sky, which you occasionally glance at through half-lidded eyes. The moon is past its zenith now, beginning its descent toward the western horizon, but its light is still bright and clear, and the shadows it casts are still sharp and distinct. You know that dawn is still many hours away, a distant theoretical event that has no bearing on this moment, and you settle even deeper into your vigil, your body completely relaxed, your mind utterly still. The sounds of the deep night wrap around you like a warm, soft blanket, and you listen without effort, without expectation, simply present in the long, quiet, beautiful dark. Your awareness, which for a long while had been drifting outward into the sounds and the silences of the night, now begins a slow, natural return to the boundaries of your own body, settling into the intimate, familiar landscape of skin and cloth and leather and metal that you have worn since before sunset. The shift happens without decision, a gentle recentering of attention that brings with it a new kind of stillness, a focus on the physical sensations that have been present all along but have waited quietly in the background, unexamined and patient. The night air has cooled further, its temperature now steady and unchanging, a cool, dry presence that rests against your face and hands while the rest of you remains wrapped in the layers of your uniform. You become aware first of the weight of these layers, not as a burden, but as a constant, reassuring pressure that grounds you to the earth, a distributed, balanced load that has become so familiar over the months and years of service that you rarely think about it at all. Tonight, with nothing else demanding your attention, you allow yourself to explore this weight in detail, piece by piece, from the innermost garment to the outermost accessory, a slow, meditative inventory of the things that clothe and equip a musketeer on a quiet watch. The first and most intimate layer is the linen shirt that rests directly against your skin, a garment so simple and so essential that it almost feels like a part of you. The linen is old and has been washed so many times that it has achieved a softness beyond the reach of new cloth, a texture that is smooth and slightly napped from wear, like the surface of a well-handled piece of paper. You can feel it against your shoulders, where the fabric drapes loosely, and against your chest, where it is held close by the crossbelt, the weave pressing gently into your skin with a faint, pleasant friction each time you breathe. The collar, which rises just above the neckline of your cassock, is slightly frayed at the edge, the threads worn thin but still holding, and it brushes your throat with a whisper-soft touch that you occasionally register when you swallow. The sleeves are full and gathered at the wrists, where they disappear into the tighter cuffs of the outer coat, and you can feel the slight bunching of the extra fabric there, a small, soft cushion between your wrists and the wool. The shirt holds a faint, clean scent of the lye soap used in the barracks laundry, a smell that mingles with the cool night air and your own quiet, resting body warmth, to create a private atmosphere of simple, orderly comfort. Over the shirt, you wear the blue wool cassock, the main garment of the musketeer's uniform, a heavy, knee-length coat that carries most of the weight and provides most of the warmth. The wool is thick and densely woven, its surface slightly rough under your fingertips but soft against the linen beneath, and it holds your body heat like a well-sealed container, creating a steady, even temperature that contrasts with the coolness on your face. You can feel the weight of the cassock primarily on your shoulders, where the broad, tailored panels distribute the load evenly, and on your upper arms, where the sleeves are set in with a slight fullness that allows for easy movement. The cassock is dyed a deep, royal blue that has faded somewhat over time, the color now a muted, dusty shade that you remember being much brighter when the garment was new, but the fading has only made it more comfortable, the repeated washings and wearings having softened the fibers and relaxed the seams until the coat moves with you like a second skin. The hem falls just to your knees, and when you shift your stance, you can feel the gentle sway of the heavy fabric against your legs, a slow, pendulum-like motion that quickly settles back into stillness. The front of the cassock is fastened with a row of small brass buttons that run from the collar to the waist, each one secured through a hand-stitched buttonhole whose edges are slightly frayed from use. You can feel the faint, cool pressure of these buttons against your chest, a series of tiny, metallic points that form a straight line down your center, and you sometimes find yourself touching the topmost button absently, running your thumb over its smooth, convex surface and the tiny, engraved fleur-de allies that decorates it. The button is cold from the night air but warms quickly under your touch, and you leave your thumb there for a moment, feeling the contrast between the cool metal and the warm wool. The buttonholes, are reinforced with extra stitching that you can trace with your fingertip if you choose, a fine, tight thread that is held firm through countless fastenings and unfastenings, a small testament to the patience of the tailor who made the coat long before it came into your possession. Over the cassock, on your chest and back, you wear the tabard that marks you visibly as a king's musketeer, a sleeveless outer garment of the same blue wool, but adorned with the large, silver-embroidered cross that signifies your company. The tabard is lighter than the cassock, a single layer of fabric that hangs from your shoulders and is open at the sides, held in place by a belt, or, in your case, by the crossbelt that passes over it. You can feel the tabard as an additional, gentle weight on your shoulders, a slight increase in the overall load that is barely noticeable but adds to the sense of solid, layered protection. The embroidered cross, which covers most of your chest and extends onto your back, has a texture entirely different from the wool. It is smooth and slightly raised, the silver thread having been stitched densely over a padded base so that it stands out from the fabric, and when you move your hand over it, you can feel the individual threads and the subtle variations in their height, a delicate, intricate landscape of silver on blue. The cross is cool to the touch, cooler than the surrounding wool, and it gleams faintly in the moonlight whenever you shift your position, catching the light and holding it for a moment before releasing it again. You are proud of this cross in a quiet, unspoken way, not as a symbol of rank or privilege, but as a mark of belonging, a reminder that you are part of something orderly and enduring. The crossbelt, which passes diagonally across your chest from the right shoulder to the left hip, is perhaps the most constant and insistent of all the sensations you wear tonight. It is a broad strip of buff leather, nearly 3 inches wide, that has been softened by years of use and regular oiling until it has the texture of firm, smooth skin, supple enough to bend easily but strong enough to support the weight of your sidearm and powder flask without stretching. You can feel its pressure across your chest with every breath you take, a steady, uniform compression that expands slightly when you inhale and contracts when you exhale, as if the belt is breathing with you. The leather has darkened to a deep, rich brown, almost mahogany in the moonlight, and it carries the faint, pleasant scent of the neat's foot oil that you apply to it once a week, a smell that reminds you of the stables and the tack room and the simple, repetitive work of maintenance that fills so many of your daylight hours. The buckle, which rests near your left hip, is of heavy brass, its surface worn smooth and shiny from the constant friction of being fastened and unfastened, and you can reach down and touch it at any time, feeling its solid, dependable weight and the slight warmth it has absorbed from your body. The crossbelt is the backbone of your equipment, the central strap to which everything else is attached, and its pressure is so familiar that you would feel incomplete without it, a part of your physical identity as much as your own arms or legs. Attached to the crossbelt at your left side is your sidearm, a rapier with a swept hilt and a long, slender blade that hangs in a leather scabbard, its tip suspended just above the ground when you stand upright. The rapier is not a weapon you often use. Your musket is your primary tool, and the sword is more a symbol of your station than a practical necessity. But its weight is part of the overall load you carry, and you are as familiar with it as with every other piece of your kit. The scabbard is dark leather over a wooden core, its surface tooled with a simple repeating pattern of diagonal lines, and it hangs from a pair of short straps that are buckled to the crossbelt, allowing it to swing slightly when you walk. Now, as you stand still, the rapier is motionless, its weight pulling gently downward on the belt, a steady, vertical load that counterbalances the crossbelt's diagonal pull. You can feel the pommel, a heavy brass sphere, pressing lightly against your hip through the wool of the cassock, a cool, hard point of contact that shifts subtly when you adjust your posture. Sometimes you rest your free hand on the pommel, letting your fingers curl around its smooth, rounded surface, and the contact provides a small, additional sense of stability, an anchor for your hand when it is not holding the musket. On the other side of the crossbelt, at your right hip, hangs the powder flask, a vessel made of brass and shaped like a flattened pear, its surface decorated with a ring of small stamped circles around the edge. The flask contains a measure of fine priming powder, enough for several dozen shots, though you have no intention of using any tonight, and its weight is a comforting presence, a small dense mass that swings gently against your thigh when you move. The flask is closed with a tight-fitting stopper that is attached to the body of the flask by a short length of brass chain, and you can feel the chain occasionally against your leg a faint metallic tickle that comes and goes. The metal of the flask is cool, but not as cold as the night air, having absorbed some of your body heat through the layers of fabric and leather that separate it from your skin. And when you touch it, your fingertips register a smooth, slightly oily surface that has been polished by countless hands over the years. The flask, like the rapier and the crossbelt, is part of the quiet, orderly system of your equipment, each piece fitted together with a logic and a precision that reflects the disciplined world you inhabit. Your hat, a wide-brimmed felt hat with a low crown and a single white plume, rests on your head with a weight that you can feel in the muscles of your neck, a gentle, constant pressure that reminds you to hold your head upright. The hat is made of thick, dense felt that has been shaped into a subtle curve, the brim dipping slightly in the front and rising at the sides, and it has absorbed enough of your body's warmth that it feels almost like a living thing, a soft, dark presence that shelters your head from the night sky. The inner band, a strip of soft leather sewn into the crown, rests against your forehead with a firm but comfortable grip, leaving a faint red mark that you will see in the mirror tomorrow morning when you remove the hat at last. The plume, a long white ostrich feather that is attached to the left side of the hat by a small brass clip, moves gently in the breeze, its tip tracing slow, lazy arcs in the air, and you can feel its subtle tug on the hat each time the wind catches it, a slight rhythmic lifting that is almost like a gentle hand resting on your head. You sometimes raise your free hand and touch the brim, adjusting it by a fraction of an inch even though it needs no adjustment, simply to feel the rough, textured surface of the felt and the smooth, cool edge of the binding that finishes the rim. Your feet, planted firmly on the packed earth of the road, are encased in a pair of heavy leather boots that rise to just below your knees, their thick soles providing a solid, stable platform that connects you to the ground. The boots are old and well worn, the leather having molded itself to the shape of your feet over countless days of marching and standing, and they fit you with the intimate precision of a garment that has become part of your body. You can feel the slight pressure of the laces across your instep, the snug, even grip of the shaft around your calf, and the gentle, cushioned support of the inner sole, which is lined with a thin layer of felted wool that has compacted over time to form a perfect impression of your foot. The leather is dark brown, nearly black in the moonlight, and its surface is creased with a network of fine lines that radiate from the points of maximum flexure, a map of all the steps you have ever taken. The boots are heavy, their weight noticeable each time you lift a foot during one of your slow patrol circuits. But that weight is itself a kind of grounding, a downward pull that helps you feel rooted and stable, like a tree with deep, invisible roots. The soles are thick and slightly uneven from wear, and when you shift your weight, you can feel the texture of the road surface beneath them, the small stones and the fine gravel, and the occasional patch of softer, looser dirt, all transmitted upward through the leather and the wool into the soles of your feet. Between your hands and the musket, there are no gloves tonight, for the air is not cold enough to require them, and you prefer the direct contact of skin on wood and metal. Your hands are bare, the skin on your palms slightly calloused from the constant handling of weapons and equipment, the calluses forming a thin, tough layer over the pads at the base of your fingers and along the edge of your palm where the musket stock rests. You can feel these calluses now as you grip the weapon, the hardened skin creating a slight barrier between the sensitive inner tissue and the rough, textured wood, and you find the sensation satisfying, a sign of your trade and your experience. The backs of your hands are cool from the night air, the fine hairs standing slightly erect in response to the chill, but the palms remain warm, cradling the musket stock as if it were a living thing that shares your heat. The musket itself, the constant companion of your vigil, is a world of sensation in its own right, and you turn your attention to it now with the same slow, meticulous care that you have given to your clothing. The stock is made of walnut, a dark, dense wood that has been shaped and smoothed by the hands of a gunsmith long ago, its surface now polished by years of handling until it gleams with a soft, muted sheen. You can feel the grain of the wood under your fingertips, subtle, wavy lines that vary in texture from one part of the stock to another, and you trace these lines absently as you stand, following their gentle curves and walls. The stock is cool where it has not been in contact with your body, but the section that rests against your palm and forearm has warmed to match your skin temperature, creating a subtle thermal gradient that you can detect when you shift your grip. The comb, the upper edge of the stock where your cheek would rest if you were aiming, is smooth and slightly rounded, and you run your thumb along it occasionally, feeling the seamless transition between the wood and the brass butt plate. The barrel, which extends forward from the lot for nearly 4 feet, is a long, slender tube of steel that has been browned to a dark matte finish that prevents reflections, and it is cool to the touch, the metal having surrendered its daytime heat to the night air long ago. You can feel the barrel's chill through the thin layer of skin on your fingertips when you reach forward to touch it, a cold, smooth surface that seems to draw the warmth from your hand, and you withdraw after a moment, leaving the barrel to its own quiet temperature. The ramrod, a slim iron rod that rests in its pipes beneath the barrel, is also cold and smooth, its end slightly flattened where it has been used to push countless wads and balls down the bore, and you can feel this flatness when you run your finger over it. A tiny, functional detail that speaks of the many firings the musket has endured. The lock, the complex assembly of flint, frizzen, pan, and hammer, is a compact cluster of shapes and textures. The rough, chipped edge of the flint, the smooth, curved surface of the frizzen, the tiny, precise pan that sits open and clean, the heavy, solid hammer that is held back by the sear. You touch each of these parts in turn, a slow, habitual sequence that reassures you of the weapon's readiness, and you feel the cold, the smoothness, the slight oily residue of the preserving grease, and the sharp, precise edges of the metalwork, all combining into a single, complex impression of a tool that is both simple and intricate. The combined weight of all these items, the shirt, the cassock, the tabard, the crossbelt, the rapier, the powder flask, the hat, the boots, and the musket distributes itself across your body in a way that you have long since internalized, a map of pressure points and weight lines that defines your posture and your stance. Your shoulders carry the downward pull of the belt and the cassock. Your hips bear the lateral swing of the rapier and the flask. Your neck supports the hat, your feet and legs manage the grounding of it all, and your hands, of course, hold the musket, the central focal point of the entire arrangement. You notice now that your body has made 1,000 tiny adjustments to accommodate this load, adjustments that are so automatic that you never think about them, a slight backward lean to counterbalance the forward weight of the musket, a minute tightening of the muscles in your lower back to stabilize your spine, a relaxed, even breathing pattern that works around the compression of the crossbelt. You are, in this moment, a perfectly balanced system of weights and counterweights, a living structure that has been shaped and tuned by its equipment, and the sensation is deeply, fundamentally satisfying, like a well-tuned instrument resting silently in its case, ready but at ease. You stand now, in the deep, quiet hours of the night, fully aware of every piece of your uniform and every sensation it produces, and you find that this awareness does not distract or disturb, but rather deepens your stillness, anchoring you even more firmly to the present moment. The night air continues to cool your face and hands, the moon continues its slow descent, and the sounds of the deep night continue their gentle, constant chorus, but your primary reality now is the reality of your own body and the things it carries, a small, self-contained world of cloth and leather and metal and wood that moves with you, breathes with you, and waits with you, and enduring through the long, quiet hours until dawn. Your mind, having completed its slow inventory of the uniform and the musket, now turns outward again, not to the present darkness but to the quiet, sunlit hours that preceded this night. Hours that passed with the same gentle, unhurried rhythm that governs everything on this road. The memory of the day's ordinary traffic surfaces without effort, rising from the depths of your consciousness like a soft, familiar image that has been waiting just beneath the surface, and you let it come, allowing the pictures to form and dissolve in the quiet theatre of your mind. The road, now empty and silver under the moon, was once a corridor of quiet, unremarkable movement, a strip of beaten earth that played host to a small, predictable procession of travelers whose comings and goings were so routine that you barely registered them at the time. Now, in the deep stillness of your watch, they return to you as gentle, fleeting scenes, each one a miniature world of simple, unhurried details that you can examine with the same patient attention you have given to the sounds and the sensations of the night. The first image that drifts into your awareness is that of a farmer and his cart, a slow-moving tableau that you witnessed in the mid-morning when the sun was still climbing and the shadows were long and cool. The cart was a simple, sturdy vehicle made of weathered grey wood, its planks held together by iron bands that had rusted to a deep reddish-brown, and its two wheels were tall and narrow, their iron rims leaving thin, precise tracks in the dust as they turned. The farmer walked beside the cart rather than riding on it, his hand resting lightly on the bridle of the single draft horse that pulled the load. A heavy, patient animal with a coat the color of dry earth and a mane that fell in a shaggy, uneven fringe over its broad neck. The horse moved with a slow, rhythmic plod, its large feathered hooves lifting and falling in a steady, unhurried cadence that set the pace for the entire procession, a pace so leisurely that it seemed almost like a form of stillness in itself. The cart was loaded with hay, a high, loose stack of dried grass that swayed gently with every bump and rut in the road, its pale golden color catching the sunlight and glowing with a soft, diffuse warmth, and the scent of it a dry, sweet, dusty fragrance that you could smell long after the cart had passed drifted through the air and mingled with the other smells of the countryside, the earth and the hedgerows, and the faint distant hint of wood smoke. You recall now the small details of that passing, the way the farmer wore a broad-brimmed straw hat that shaded his face, its brim frayed and uneven, and how his shirt, a loose homespun garment of undyed linen, was patched at the elbows with squares of slightly darker cloth, neatly stitched and carefully maintained. He did not look at you as he passed, or if he did, it was with a brief, wordless nod that acknowledged your presence without interrupting the steady rhythm of his walking, a gesture so small and so ordinary that it barely registered as an interaction. The cart creaked softly as it went, a low wooden groan that repeated with every turn of the wheels, a sound so rhythmic and so unobtrusive that it blended into the background of the day, just as the night sounds now blend into the darkness. You watched the cart until it disappeared over the gentle rise to the east, the haystack slowly sinking out of sight, and then the road was empty again, the dust settling in its wake, the silence returning as if nothing had ever been there. That was the nature of the traffic on this road, brief, quiet interruptions of the stillness, arrivals and departures that left no lasting mark, only a faint memory that you can now revisit with the same calm detachment with which you first observed it. After the cart, some time later in the morning, when the sun had risen higher and the heat had begun to build, a flock of sheep came along the road from the south, moving as a single, slow, woolly mass that seemed to flow like a thick, grey-white liquid over the dirt. The sheep were guided by a shepherd who walked behind them with a long, crooked staff, a young man with a weathered face and a quiet, patient manner, his steps matching the easy, unhurried pace of the animals. The flock numbered perhaps 50 or 60, a mixture of ewes and nearly grown lambs, their fleeces thick and matted from the fields, carrying the faint, pungent smell of lanolin and trampled grass that reached you before the animals themselves came into view. They moved without urgency, their small, neat hooves clicking softly on the packed earth, a sound that was less a series of individual footfalls than a continuous, gentle patter, like the rustle of many dry leaves stirred by a breeze. The sheep did not walk in a straight line, but spread out across the width of the road, drifting to the grassy verges to snatch mouthfuls of weeds before the shepherd tapped his staff on the ground and called to them in a low, melodic voice that they seemed to understand, returning to the center of the road with the slow, resigned obedience of creatures who have learned the rhythm of the journey. You remember the way the sun caught the edges of their fleeces, creating a faint, luminous halo round each animal, and how the dust rose in small, lazy puffs where their hooves disturbed the surface of the road. The lambs, smaller and more energetic, occasionally broke from the main flock to scamper a few steps to the side before returning, their tails flicking with a quick, reflexive motion, but even their energy was subdued, tempered by the heat and the general, pervasive calm of the day. The shepherd acknowledged you with a slight raise of his staff as he passed, a silent greeting that you returned with an equally slight nod, and then the flock moved on, the bleating of the ewes and the soft answering calls of the lambs fading gradually into the distance, until only the smell of wool and the faint scattered marks of their passing remained on the road. The sheep, like the haycart, were a quiet, ordinary presence, a ripple in the stillness that settled back into silence the moment they were gone, leaving you with nothing to do but stand and watch and wait. Later, in the early afternoon, when the shadows had begun to shrink and the heat of the day had reached its full drowsy intensity, a single rider came down the road from the west, a man on a brown horse moving at a steady, unhurried trot. The horse was a solid, compact animal, its coat a deep, rich chestnut that gleamed with a healthy sheen in the sunlight, and its mane and tail were dark, almost black, flowing with a smooth, liquid motion as it moved. The rider sat easily in the saddle, his posture relaxed but upright, his hands holding the reins with a light, practiced touch, and he wore a simple travelling cloak of dark, homespun wool that was dusty from the road, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the overhead sun. You did not recognize him, and he did not seem to recognize you. He was simply a traveller, one of the many who used the King's Road to go about their private, unremarkable business, his destination unknown, and his purpose unimportant. The horse's hooves made a soft, rhythmic thudding on the dirt, a four-beat cadence that was faster than the cart's creak or the sheep's patter, but still slow enough to feel unhurried. A steady, predictable sound that announced his approach long before he came into view. You recall the small fleeting details of the rider's passage, the way the dust rose from the horse's hooves and hung in the air for a moment before settling, the faint jingle of the bit in the harness, the brief, curious glance the horse gave you as it passed, its large dark eye rolling slightly to take you in before returning its attention to the road ahead. The rider did not stop, did not speak, did not even slow his pace. He simply continued on his way, disappearing toward the east with the same quiet, purposeful anonymity with which he had arrived, and within a few minutes the road was as empty as if he had never been there. You remember thinking at the time that you would likely never see him again, and the thought did not trouble you. It was simply a fact, a small neutral observation about the transient nature of the road's traffic, where every passer was a stranger and every meeting was as brief and inconsequential as the meeting of two leaves floating on the surface of a slow-moving stream. In the late afternoon, when the sun had begun its long, slow descent, and the shadows were stretching out again across the fields, a carriage came along the road from the east, a closed carriage of dark, polished wood with brass fittings that caught the golden light and gleamed with a soft, muted brilliance. It was drawn by a pair of matched grey horses, their coats dappled with darker spots, their manes braided neatly, and their tails tied up in a way that spoke of careful, attentive grooming, and they moved with a high-stepping, elegant gait that was almost a dance, their hooves lifting and falling in precise, synchronized rhythm. The carriage itself was a private vehicle, not a public coach, its windows covered by drawn curtains of dark, heavy fabric that revealed nothing of the passengers inside, and its driver sat on a high seat at the front, a man in a dark coat and a tricorn hat who held the reins with a practiced, steady hand. The wheels, which were painted a deep, glossy black and trimmed with a thin red stripe, turned with a smooth, almost silent motion, their iron rims barely making a sound on the packed dirt, and the only noise that accompanied the carriage was the soft, rhythmic jingle of the harness and the occasional gentle creak of the suspension springs as the vehicle negotiated the uneven surface of the road. The carriage did not stop, did not slow, did not offer any acknowledgement of your presence. It simply rolled past with the quiet, self-contained dignity of a thing that had its own purpose and its own destination, and you watched it go with the same detached observational calm that you gave to all the day's traffic. You remember the way the dust, stirred by the horse's hooves and the turning wheels, rose in a thin brown cloud that drifted slowly across the road and settled on the grass at the verge, and how the faint lingering scent of the horses, a warm animal smell, mixed with the oil of their polished leather tack, hung in the air for a moment before the breeze carried it away. You remember the small, precise details of the carriage's construction, the curved, elegant shape of the body, the way the sunlight reflected off the brass door handles and the polished hubs of the wheels, the faint, shadowy suggestion of movement behind the dark curtains that might have been a passenger adjusting their position, or might have been nothing at all. And then, as with all the others, the carriage was gone, swallowed by the distance and the gathering dusk, leaving the road empty and still and quiet. These were the travellers that passed this way during the daylight hours, the ordinary, unremarkable traffic that the road received and then released, each one a small, self-contained world of purpose and motion that intersected briefly with your own stillness before moving on. There were no urgent messengers, no noble processions, no groups of soldiers or merchants with laden wagons. There was only the slow, gentle, predictable flow of rural life, the quiet comings and goings of people and animals whose business was as simple and as peaceful as the countryside itself. The road you reflect now in the deep silence of the night is nothing more than a strip of beaten earth that holds the memory of these ordinary movements, a passive, patient surface that receives the impress of hooves and wheels and feet and then erases them with the next rain, the next wind, the next passing of time. The dust they raised has long since settled. The tracks they left have been softened and blurred by the night's dew, and the road now lies clean and blank under the moon, ready for whatever tomorrow's traffic might bring. Though you suspect, with a quiet inner certainty, that it will be more of the same, another cart of hay, another flock of sheep, another solitary rider, another closed carriage, all moving at their own slow, unhurried pace, all contributing their small, fleeting presence to the long accumulated of this life. You find a gentle, reassuring comfort in this thought, a sense that the road and its traffic are part of a larger, deeper rhythm that continues whether you are here to witness it or not, a rhythm that is as old as the land itself and as steady as the turning of the seasons. The road was here before you came, and it will be here after you leave, and the carts and the sheep and the riders and the carriages will continue to pass, their wheels and hooves and feet wearing the same familiar grooves into the same patient earth, their drivers and shepherds and passengers living out their own quiet, unremarkable lives in the same slow, peaceful manner that you have observed today. There is no drama in this, no urgency, no conflict. There is only the gentle, ongoing flow of ordinary existence, a flow that you, as a musketeer standing watch, are privileged to observe and protect, not from any threat, but simply as a witness to its continuity, a single, still point in the slow, eternal movement of the world. The night continues around you as these memories drift through your mind, the moon still shining, the wind still whispering, the brook still murmuring, and you feel a deep, quiet connection to the road and to all the unremarkable travellers who have passed over it, a connection that is not based on names or faces or specific events, but on the simple shared experience of being present in this place, of moving or standing on this same strip of earth under the same vast, unchanging sky. The cart, the sheep, the rider, the carriage, they are all gone now, dissolved into the past like the daylight itself. But their memory lingers here with you, a soft, gentle presence that fills the empty road with the quiet, peaceful essence of ordinary life, and you hold that memory lightly, letting it accompany you through the remaining hours of your watch, a calm, unspoken companion in the long, still dark. The first stroke of midnight arrives without warning, a low, resonant tone that drifts across the darkened fields from the distant village bell tower, so faint at first that you are not entirely certain you have heard it at all. The sound seems to rise from the earth itself, a deep, sonorous vibration that travels through the cool night air and reaches your ears as a soft, mellow hum, a single, sustained note that hangs suspended between the darkness and the silence before it slowly, gently fades. You pause in your stillness, your attention shifting from the quiet, internal rhythms of your own thoughts to this new, external presence, and you wait, listening with a calm, patient expectancy. The bell tower, which you know stands in the center of the village nearly 2 miles away, is an old square structure of weathered stone, its single bell cast from bronze that has darkened with age, and its chimes mark the hours for the farmers and the craftsmen and the families who live within earshot, a steady, reliable measure of time in a world that otherwise pays little attention to the passing of minutes. Tonight the bell's voice carries unusually far, its tone clear and pure in the cold, dense air, and you find yourself counting the strokes as they come, your licks moving silently with each one, a small automatic ritual that connects you to the distant, unseen community that sleeps while you stand guard. The second stroke follows after a pause that feels both long and perfectly measured, a second deep, rounded note that resonates with the same slow, deliberate gravity as the first, and you count it with a simple, unthinking precision, your mind already settling into the rhythm of the chimes. The interval between strokes is exactly calibrated, a regular, unhurried spacing that gives each note time to fully decay before the next one begins, and you notice how the sound seems to expand outward in all directions after it is struck, rolling across the fields, passing through the hedgerows, flowing over the road where you stand, and then continuing on into the deeper darkness beyond, as if the bell is speaking to the night itself and the night is listening. The third stroke arrives, and the fourth, each one a soft, low, almost mournful tone that carries no sadness but rather a profound, peaceful solemnity, a voice that seems to say that all is well, that the world is orderly, that the hours are passing as they should. You count them without hurry, letting the numbers accumulate in your awareness like the gentle, steady accumulation of dew on the grass. 5, 6, 7. Each stroke a quiet, affirming presence, a marker of the night's midpoint. The eighth stroke sounds slightly louder, or perhaps the wind has shifted just enough to bring it more directly to you, and you feel the vibration of it in your chest, a subtle physical resonance that adds a new dimension to the experience, a quiet internal hum that echoes the external note and then fades. The ninth stroke and the 10th follow with the same slow, majestic pace, and you realize that you have been holding your breath between them, waiting for each new tone with a calm, attentive stillness that is its own form of meditation. The 11th stroke comes, and then, after the same measured pause, the 12th, the final stroke, the one that marks the exact, precise center of the night, the moment when one day officially ends and another begins, though the darkness shows no sign of the transition and the world continues its deep, uninterrupted rest. You let the last note fade completely, listening as its resonance diminishes from a clear, full tone to a soft, distant hum, to a memory of sound, and then to nothing at all. The silence that follows, seeming deeper and more profound than any silence you have experienced so far this night, as if the bell has taken all the other sounds with it and left behind a pure, crystalline stillness that fills the air, like water fills a bowl. You remain motionless for a long moment after the chimes have ended, your awareness expanded by the experience, your mind quiet and receptive, and you find yourself reflecting, without any particular urgency, on the fact that your watch is now exactly half over, that the hours before this moment are equal in number to the hours that remain, a perfect, symmetrical division of the night that places you at its center. The thought is not a calculation or a countdown, it is simply an observation, a quiet recognition of a temporal balance that exists for this one instant and then immediately begins to tip toward the dawn. You feel no rush, no impatience, no desire for the watch to end, only a calm, accepting awareness that time is passing in its own steady, unhurried way, and that you are exactly where you should be within that passage, a still, silent witness to the turning of the great, invisible wheel that carries the world from darkness into light and back again. The midnight hour, which in stories is so often a time of portent or fear, is here on this quiet road nothing more than a soft, gentle marker, a reminder of the order that underlies all things, and you receive it with the same simple, unassuming gratitude that you would give to any other small, beautiful occurrence. Now that the bell has fallen silent, you turn your attention upward, scanning the sky with a slow, deliberate sweep of your eyes, noting how the familiar constellations have shifted their positions since you last observed them in the early hours of the night. The great celestial river, the pale milky band of stars that you traced earlier, has moved noticeably across the heavens, its shimmering, indistinct form now angled more steeply toward the western horizon, and the bright, steady star that you use as a reference point, the one the old soldiers called the Watchman's Star, though it has other names in other places, has climbed higher, its light sharper and colder than it was before, a tiny, brilliant point of blue-white fire that seems to pierce the darkness with an almost deliberate intensity. The plough, that familiar constellation of 7 stars shaped like a farmer's tool, has rotated slowly around the pole, its handle now pointing more downward toward the earth. And you note this change with a quiet inner satisfaction, a confirmation that the night is proceeding according to its ancient predictable patterns. The moon, which you have been watching on and off since it rose above the tree line, has also changed. It is higher now, having passed its zenith and begun its descent, and it appears smaller in the sky than it did earlier, a bright silver disk that has withdrawn somewhat from the earth, its light colder and more distant, a chill, clear radiance that casts shadows of a slightly different quality than before. You study these shadows now, noticing how they have contracted or stretched in response to the moon's higher angle. The dark shapes that the signpost and the hedge and the lone tree cast upon the ground having shifted their positions and altered their dimensions in the hours since the moon first rose. The signpost's shadow, which earlier pointed westward in a long, slender line, has shortened considerably, its tip now much closer to the base of the post, and it has rotated slightly, swinging around like the hand of a vast, slow clock that marks the passage of the night without numbers or divisions. The hedge's shadow, a dark, ragged stripe that lay across the road, has pulled back toward the hedge itself, its edges softening as the moonlight falls more vertically, and the field beyond now lies in a more uniform, diffuse illumination, its textures less sharply defined than they were when the shadows were long. The lone tree's shadow, which you observe stretching far across the grass in the early hours, has contracted into a compact, dense pool of darkness directly beneath its branches, a circular stain of black that seems to collect and hold the absence of light, like a small, private night within the larger night. These changes, small and gradual as they are, confirm that the world is not static, but rather engaged in a slow, continuous dance of light and darkness, a dance that you are privileged to witness from your still, silent post. The air at the midnight hour feels different, you notice, a subtle shift in its temperature and texture that you attribute to the earth having fully released its stored heat and settled into the deep, steady cold of the lake night. Your breath, when you exhale, now forms a visible mist that lingers for a moment before dissipating, a small soft cloud of vapor that catches the moonlight and glows briefly with a pale silver luminescence, and you watch this small phenomenon with a quiet, detached interest, noting how the mist thickens when you breathe out slowly and thins when your breath is shallow. The cold has not yet penetrated your layers of wool and linen, your body remains warm inside its cocoon of cloth and leather, but the skin on your face and hands, which is directly exposed, has grown cool and slightly numb, a sensation that is not unpleasant, but rather adds to the feeling of stillness and detachment, as if your body is gradually becoming one with the cool, quiet elements around you. The sounds of the midnight hour are different too. You realize as you listen the insect chorus having diminished significantly since you last attended to it, their chirps now slower and more sporadic, as if the cold has calmed their small, energetic bodies and sent them deeper into the grass. The crickets that remain call with a drowsy, intermittent rhythm, their notes longer and more drawn out, and there are now long gaps of silence between each burst of sound, gaps that grow longer as the minutes pass. The brook, by contrast, continues its steady, unchanging murmur, the one constant in a soundscape that is gradually winding down, its liquid voice a soft, continuous presence that seems louder now in the relative quiet, filling the spaces that the insects have left behind. The wind has also lessened, its gusts becoming fewer and gentler, and when it does stir, it moves through the grass and the hedges with a slower, more languid motion, producing a soft, rustling sigh that quickly subsides. The overall impression is of a world that is drawing a long, slow breath and holding it, settling into a deeper, more profound stillness that seems to radiate outward from the midnight hour itself. After a long period of standing still, absorbing these changes, you feel a gentle impulse to move, not from restlessness, but from a desire to re-establish your connection to the road and to the quiet, rhythmic patrol that you have performed several times already tonight. You begin to walk, your steps slow and measured, your boots meeting the packed earth with a soft, steady crunch that sounds especially clear in the hushed midnight air. You walk 10 paces to the left, toward the western end of the crossroads where the road straightens and a view opens onto the dark, distant line of the forest, and you count the paces silently, each step a deliberate, unhurried placement of your foot on the ground. The gravel that gathers in the low spots of the road shifts under your weight, with a sound like the gentle crushing of dry leaves, a crisp, granular noise that rises and falls in a steady, repeated pattern. A soft percussion that accompanies your movement and then ceases when you stop. You pause at the end of the 10 paces, your eyes scanning the road ahead, which lies pale and empty under the moon, its surface unbroken by any new shadow or shape. And then you turn, slowly, and begin the return. You walk 10 paces to the right, past the signpost and toward the eastern end of the crossroads, where the road begins its gentle rise. Your steps now retracing the same path in reverse, the gravel crunching under your boots with the same steady, quiet rhythm. Each footfall a small, solitary event that marks the passage of your body through the still air. The regularity of the sound, the soft, rhythmic crunch that accompanies each step, is deeply soothing, a simple, predictable pattern that occupies your senses without demanding your attention, and you find that your breathing has aligned itself with your footsteps, a slow 4-step cycle of inhale and exhale that matches the pace of your walking. You reach the eastern limit of your small patrol after exactly 10 paces, and you stop, standing still once more, your circuit complete, your presence re-established at the other end of the crossroads. The night holds its breath around you, the silence that follows your footsteps seeming especially deep, as if the world has paused to acknowledge the tiny disruption of your movement before settling back into its perfect, encompassing stillness. You stand there for a while at the eastern edge of the crossroads, looking back toward the signpost and the moonlit road that stretches away to the west, and you notice, with a quiet inward smile, how your own footprints are faintly visible in the dust, a series of soft, rounded impressions that mark the path you have just walked, a temporary record of your presence that will be erased by the next wind, or the next rain, or the next cart that passes. The footprints are already beginning to soften at the edges, the fine dry dust trickling back into the depressions, and you know that by morning they will be gone, leaving no trace that you were ever here. This thought does not trouble you. It is simply a fact, a small, quiet truth about the transient nature of all things, and you accept it with the same calm, unassuming acceptance that you give to everything else tonight. You walk slowly back to the center of the crossroads, resuming your original position beside the signpost, and you stand still once again, the musket resting in your hands, the crossbelt pressing gently against your chest, the night air cool on your face. The midnight hour has passed, the bell has fallen silent, the moon continues its slow descent, and you are exactly in the middle of your watch, balanced between the hours that have gone, and the hours that have gone, and the hours that remain. A single, still figure in a world that is profoundly, perfectly at peace. The night holds its breath, and you hold yours with it, not from tension, but from a deep, quiet harmony. A sense that you and the night are breathing together, moving together, waiting together for the slow, gradual approach of the dawn that is still many hours away. In this moment, there is nothing to do, nothing to think, nothing to want. There is only the silent, silver road, the patient, ancient stars, and the quiet, steady beating of your own heart. A small, faithful drum that marks the rhythm of the night with a calm, unwavering pulse. Your mind, still drifting in the quiet aftermath of the midnight bell, begins to turn away from the road and the moon and the shadows, drawn now toward the familiar, comforting landscape of your daily life, the simple, ordered routines that fill the hours between one watch and the next. The barracks, which lies a mile or so behind you along the road you walked at dusk, is a place of deep, abiding peace. A long, low building of grey stone, with a slate roof that gleams silver in the rain and softens to a warm, dusty grey in the sun. And it has been your home for long enough that its rooms and corridors feel as familiar as the chambers of your own heart. You picture it now with the same calm, unhurried attention that you have given to everything else tonight, letting the images rise and settle in your awareness like the slow, gentle drifting of leaves onto still water, and you find that the memories bring with them a profound sense of comfort, a quiet, reassuring reminder that the watch will eventually end and the familiar rhythms of the day will resume, just as they always have. The day begins in your memory, with the soft grey light of early morning filtering through the high, narrow windows of the barracks sleeping quarters, a light that is too faint to wake anyone but strong enough to nudge the edge of your dreams toward waking. The room is a long rectangular space with a high vaulted ceiling supported by old dark wooden beams that creak gently when the wind blows, and the walls are plastered and whitewashed, their surfaces marked here and there by the faint faded outlines of old repairs, small patches where the plaster was renewed long ago. 2 rows of iron beds line the walls, each one identical to the next, their frames painted a dark, muted green that has chipped slightly over the years to reveal the grey metal beneath, and each bed is made up with a straw mattress, a wool blanket, and a single flat pillow that is replaced once a year, whether it needs it or not. You can see your own bed clearly in your mind's eye, the third from the end, on the left side, near the small window that looks out onto the courtyard, its blanket folded with the precise square corners that the sergeant insists upon, its pillow slightly flattened from use but still comfortable in a familiar, unassuming way. Beside each bed stands a wooden chest, a simple, sturdy box with a hinged lid and a small iron lock. And in these chests, the musketeers keep their personal belongings, their spare shirts and their letters, and their small private treasures, a collection of simple, ordinary objects that hold the quiet stories of their lives. The morning routine begins with the sound of the sergeant's whistle, a single, sharp note that cuts through the grey light and brings the room to life with a slow, orderly stirring that is more like the gentle waking of a large, peaceful animal than any kind of urgency. There is no shouting, no rushing. The musketeers rise from their beds with the calm, practiced motions of men who have done this 1,000 times, their movements economical and unhurried, each one following a sequence that has become so automatic that it requires no thought. You remember the feel of the cool, smooth floorboards under your bare feet as you swing your legs out of bed, the slight chill of the morning air on your skin before you pull on your shirt, the soft, familiar weight of the linen settling over your shoulders, and the way the fabric is still faintly warm from the bed if you have slept well. The man in the bed next to yours, a quiet older musketeer with a grey-streaked beard and a calm, steady manner, nods to you each morning with the same slight, wordless greeting, and you return it in kind, a tiny ritual of acknowledgement that marks the start of the day. After rising, the first order of business is the inspection, a daily ceremony that takes place in the courtyard when the weather is fair or in the long, open hall when it rains. The musketeers form 2 neat, parallel lines, their uniforms brushed and their weapons held at a precise, identical angle, and the sergeant walks slowly between the lines, his eyes moving from face to musket to boots with a careful, unhurried attention that misses nothing. You can picture the sergeant clearly, a man of medium height with a weathered, angular face and a voice that is always calm, never raised, a voice that carries authority without threat, like the steady, measured tone of the bell that marks the hours. He pauses before each man, his gaze traveling over the details of the uniform and the equipment, and he occasionally reaches out a hand to check the cleanliness of a barrel or the tightness of a crossbelt buckle, his touch light and precise, his expression revealing neither approval nor disapproval, but only a quiet, professional assessment. The inspection is not a source of anxiety, but simply another part of the rhythm, a small, daily affirmation that everything is in order, that every man is prepared, that the company functions as a single, cohesive body of which you are a small but integral part. After inspection, the morning hours are devoted to the maintenance of the weapons, a long, slow process that fills the time with quiet, repetitive motion and the soft, familiar sounds of metal on metal and cloth on wood. You remember the armory, a cool, dim room at the end of the barracks where the muskets are stored in tall wooden racks that line the walls from floor to ceiling, each rack holding 20 weapons in neat, numbered slots, each musket standing upright with its butt resting on the stone floor and its barrel leaning against the rack's padded rail. The armory smells of gun oil and old wood and the faint, acrid tang of spent powder that never quite dissipates, a smell that you've come to associate with safety and order, and the quiet, patient work of care and preservation. You sit on a low wooden stool with your musket across your knees, a clean rag and a small bottle of oil at your side, and you work your way through the weapon with a slow, methodical precision that is almost a form of meditation, your hands moving through the familiar sequence without haste, without error. You begin with the barrel, running a lightly oiled cloth through the bore with the aid of the ramrod, the cloth emerging from the muzzle dark, with the residue of the previous firing, or simply with the fine invisible dust that accumulates even when the weapon has not been used. The motion is slow and steady, the ramrod sliding in and out with a soft, rhythmic whisper, and you repeat it several times until the cloth comes away clean, the bore now gleaming with a faint, oily sheen that protects the metal from rust. Then you turn your attention to the lock, the intricate assembly of flint, frizzen, pan, and springs that requires the most delicate care, and you clean each part with a small, soft brush, removing the tiny grains of powder residue that collect in the crevices and the corners, wiping the metal surfaces with an oiled rag until they shine with a dark, subdued luster. The flint, which is the heart of the mechanism, you examine carefully, checking its edge for chips or dullness, and if necessary, you replace it with a fresh one from the small leather pouch that hangs on your belt, a task that requires only a few moments of focused, precise attention. The wood of the stock you wipe down with a slightly damp cloth to remove the dust and the faint, greasy residue of handling, and then you buff it with a dry rag until the grain of the walnut glows with a warm, deep, almost liquid sheen, the result of years of oiling and polishing, the wood having absorbed so much care that it seems almost alive under your hands. The other musketeers around you are engaged in the same quiet work, their heads bent over their weapons, their movements slow and deliberate, and the armory is filled with the soft, collective sound of cleaning rods sliding through barrels and cloths wiping over metal, a gentle, rustling symphony of maintenance that you find deeply soothing. There is occasional, quiet conversation, low murmurs about the weather, or the quality of the morning bread, or the condition of a horse's shoe, but mostly there is silence, a companionable, shared stillness that binds the men together without words. You find a quiet satisfaction in this work, a sense that you are participating in something larger than yourself, something that extends back through time to all the musketeers who have cleaned their weapons in this same room, sitting on these same stools, using the same slow, careful motions, and that will extend forward to all the musketeers who will come after you. A long, unbroken chain of care and attention that stretches across the years like the steady, continuous flow of the brook. After the weapons are clean and returned to their racks, the morning continues with the simple, ordinary routines of daily life. Routines that are so familiar and so predictable that they have become a kind of quiet background music to your existence, a steady, comforting rhythm that requires no thought and provokes no anxiety. The midday meal is taken in the long, low-ceilinged mess hall that adjoins the barracks, a room filled with the smell of fresh bread and simmering stew and the faint, clean scent of the lye soap used to scrub the long wooden tables. The tables arranged in parallel rows, the surfaces worn smooth by countless elbows and bowls, and the benches are of the same dark, sturdy wood, polished by use to a soft, muted sheen. The food is simple and plentiful, a thick brown stew of vegetables and sometimes a little meat served in deep earthenware bowls that hold the heat well, the broth rich and savory with the flavors of onion and carrot, and a hint of herbs from the kitchen garden, a loaf of coarse dark bread with a hard, floury crust, and a dense, chewy crumb that you tear into pieces and use to soak up the last of the stew, a cup of watered wine that is cool and slightly sour, refreshing rather than intoxicating, served from a large lectave, the table or the tapau to the tout. The conversation during the meal is quiet and unhurried, the men speaking in low tones about the small events of the day, the weather, the state of the road, the news from the village, and you listen more than you speak, letting the gentle flow of voices wash over you like the murmur of the brook. After the meal, there is often a period of rest, a quiet hour or two when the barrack settles into a deep, drowsy silence, and the men retreat to their beds or to the courtyard, to sit in the sun and doze or write letters, or simply stare at the sky, with the calm, unfocused gaze of those who have learned the art of doing nothing. You remember the courtyard as a peaceful, enclosed space surrounded on three sides by the walls of the barracks, and on the fourth by a low stone wall that overlooks the fields, its flagstones worn smooth by the passage of many feet, its corners softened by clumps of lavender and rosemary that release their fragrance when brushed against. The sun, when it shines, warms the stones and fills the courtyard with a gentle golden light that seems to slow everything down, and you have spent many contented hours sitting on the low wall, your back against a warm stone pillar, watching the clouds drift across the sky and listening to the distant sounds of the countryside, the lowing of cattle, the call of a bird, the faint, rhythmic thud of an axe from the woodpile behind the stables. These hours of rest are as much a part of the rhythm as the watches and the drills and the inspections, a necessary restorative pause that balances the other parts of the day, and you have come to value them as much as any other aspect of your life in the company. The afternoon, when it arrives, brings more of the same quiet, orderly activity, the kind of work that fills the time without filling the mind, leaving you free to drift in a calm, peaceful state of half-attention that is almost like sleep itself. There are uniforms to be brushed and mended, the blue wool of the cassocks and the tabards requiring constant care to keep them free of dust and loose threads and the small, inevitable wear that accumulates over time, and you sit with a needle and thread, your fingers moving through the familiar motions of stitching, the needle passing in and out of the fabric with a soft, rhythmic precision, the thread pulling tight with a tiny, satisfying resistance. The other men around you are engaged in similar tasks, their heads bent over their work, the room quiet except for the soft sounds of needles and the occasional murmured request for a pair of scissors or a spool of thread. The afternoon light slants through the windows, casting long, golden rectangles on the wooden floor, and the dust motes dance in the beams, a slow, silent ballet that you watch from the corner of your eye as you stitch, your mind peaceful and still. The stables, which you visit at least once each day, are another source of quiet, grounding routine, a place where the solid, warm presence of the horses and the smell of hay and leather and the soft, rhythmic sounds of chewing and breathing create an atmosphere of profound animal calm. The horses stand in their stalls, their large, dark eyes following you as you move down the aisle, their ears swiveling forward and back, and you greet each one with a quiet word and a gentle touch on the neck or the shoulder, feeling the warmth of their bodies through the coarse, glossy hair. The grooming of the horses is a slow, methodical task that you find deeply satisfying, the currycomb moving in circles over the muscled shoulders and the broad, solid flanks, loosening the dust and the dried sweat, followed by the stiff brush that sweeps the debris away and leaves the coat gleaming, and finally the soft cloth that buffs the hair to a deep, lustrous shine. The horses respond to this attention with quiet, contented sighs, their heads lowering, their eyes half closing, and you feel a quiet kinship with them, a shared appreciation for the simple physical pleasure of being cared for, of being at rest, of belonging to a place and a routine that asks nothing more than presence and patience. The evening, when it comes, brings the lighting of the lamps and the quiet, communal rituals of supper and the final inspection, and then the slow, gradual winding down of the day as the men prepare for sleep or for the night watch, depending on their duty roster. You remember the particular peaceful quality of the barracks after dark, when the lamps have been turned low and the only sounds are the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping men and the occasional, gentle creak of the old beams settling, the whole building seeming to exhale a long, slow breath of relief as it sinks into rest. The night watches, which you have come to know so well, are simply an extension of this rest, a continuation of the same quiet, orderly rhythm in a different setting, under the stars instead of a ceiling, with the road instead of the barracks floor, and you find that the transition from one to the other is seamless and natural, a gentle shift of location that does not disturb the deep underlying peace that defines your life in the King's service. As you stand now on the moonlit road, these memories of the daily routine settle around you like a soft, familiar cloak, and you draw comfort from them, knowing that the barracks waits for you, patient and still, ready to receive you when the watch is done. The moon, which has been your silent companion through the long hours of the watch, now approaches the end of its journey across the sky, sinking toward the dark, jagged line of the western tree line with a slow, deliberate grace that seems even more unhurried than its rise. You have been aware of its descent for some time, noting the gradual lowering of its position relative to the signpost and the lone tree, but now the change becomes unmistakable. The silver disk hovering just above the tops of the distant oaks, its light taking on a slightly warmer, softer quality as it nears the horizon. The shadows, which have been shrinking and shifting all night, now stretch out once more, long and thin and faint, reaching eastward across the road as if they are trying to hold on to the last of the moonlight before it fades. You watch this final act of the moon's passage with a quiet, reverent attention, knowing that the setting of the moon marks the beginning of the night's deepest, darkest phase, the hour when the world holds its breath and waits for the first faint hint of dawn, a hint that is still far away, still only a promise whispered in the cold black air. The descent accelerates, or seems to, as the moon touches the tree line, its perfect circle beginning to break apart against the dark tangle of branches, the light fragmenting into a dozen bright shards that gleam between the trunks and then vanish, one by one, as the moon sinks lower. The lower edge of the disk disappears first, swallowed by the earth, and then the middle, and finally only a thin, curved sliver of silver remains, a delicate, luminous crescent that seems to cling to the horizon for a long, lingering moment before it, too, slides out of sight, leaving behind a faint, residual glow that stains the western sky with a pale, ghostly light. That glow, which is the last reflected memory of the moon, persists for a while, a soft, diffuse radiance that fades so gradually that you cannot pinpoint the exact moment when it is gone, when the western horizon becomes as dark as the rest of the sky, a seamless, uniform blackness that stretches from horizon to horizon, unbroken by any source of direct light. The absence of the moon is not a loss but a transformation, a shift from one kind of darkness to another, and you find that your eyes, which had grown accustomed to the silver, monochrome world of the moonlit hours, must now adjust to a new, deeper darkness, a darkness that is not empty but filled with a different kind of presence. The stars, which were always there behind the moon's bright veil, now emerge with a brilliance that you had forgotten was possible, their light sharper and colder and infinitely more numerous than before, a dense glittering field of points that covers the sky from edge to edge, a vast celestial tapestry of light that seems to pulse with a quiet, steady energy. The great milky river, which was faint and indistinct during the moonlit hours, now reveals itself in full glory, a broad shimmering band of diffuse radiance that cuts across the heavens from north to south, its edges soft and blurred, its interior a dense glowing mass of stars, too numerous and too distant to resolve into individual points, a river of pure ancient light that flows silently through the darkness, carrying the eye and the mind into the depths of infinity. You find yourself looking up at this new, star-filled sky with a sense of quiet wonder, your neck tilted back, your hat brim shading your eyes from nothing, and you let your gaze wander slowly across the constellations, tracing their familiar shapes with a calm, leisurely attention that has no goal and no destination. The watchman's star, which you noted earlier, has now climbed to its highest point and begun its own slow descent, its blue-white brilliance undiminished by the moon's absence, and it seems to hang directly overhead, a single, perfect jewel set in the dark crown of the night. The plough, which you observe rotating around the pole, has continued its slow circular journey, its handle now pointing almost straight down toward the northern horizon, and you note this change with the same quiet, internal satisfaction that you would feel at the completion of a small, familiar task. Other constellations, whose names you have learned from the old soldiers but rarely speak aloud, fill the spaces between the more familiar patterns. The swan, with its wide outstretched wings, the eagle with its bright central star, the crown with its perfect semicircular arc of smaller lights, each one a story waiting to be told, each one a marker of the season and the hour and the slow, steady turning of the earth beneath your feet. The darkness on the ground, by contrast, is now almost complete, the road and the fields and the hedges having been swallowed by a blackness so profound that you can barely distinguish the landscape from the sky, the horizon line marked only by the faint, subtle difference between the total black of the earth and the slightly lighter, star-filled black of the heavens. Your eyes, which have been adjusting to the diminishing light for hours, can still make out the nearest objects: the signpost, the hedge, the outline of your own hands on the musket. But the details are gone, the textures and the colors reduced to simple, flat silhouettes, dark shapes against a slightly less dark background. The road, which was a pale silver ribbon under the moon, is now a faint, grey suggestion of a path, its surface visible only as a subtle horizontal band of slightly lighter darkness that cuts through the deeper black of the fields, and you know its course more by memory than by sight. Your feet planted on its familiar, packed surface, your body oriented by the invisible landmarks that you have memorized over many nights. This deep, moonless darkness is the coldest part of the night, the hour when the earth has radiated the last of its stored heat into the void of space and the air settles into a steady, penetrating chill that seems to rise from the ground and fall from the sky at the same time, enveloping you in a cool, even embrace that is not uncomfortable, but is undeniably present. A constant, gentle reminder of the season and the hour. Your breath, when you exhale, now forms a substantial cloud of vapor, a soft white mist that hangs in the air for several seconds before dissipating, and you watch it with a quiet, detached interest, noting how the cloud thickens when you breathe out slowly and deliberately, how it catches the faint starlight and glows with a pale, ghostly luminescence before fading into the darkness. The cold has finally penetrated the outer layers of your uniform, reaching through the wool of the cassock and the linen of the shirt to touch your skin with cool, gentle fingers, and you feel it most keenly on your cheeks, where the skin is exposed and the wind, what little remains of it, bites with a soft, sharp edge that is almost pleasant in its clarity, a sensation that sharpens your awareness and anchors you to the present moment. Your hands, too, feel the cold now, the fingers that grip the musket stock having grown slightly stiff and numb, and you flex them occasionally, curling and uncurling them with a slow, deliberate motion that restores the circulation and reminds you of your own physicality. The wood of the musket stock, which was warm from your touch earlier, has cooled significantly, and you can feel the difference when you shift your grip, the surface now a cool, smooth presence under your palms, the metal parts cold enough that they seem to draw the heat from your skin when you touch them. You do not mind the cold. It is simply another aspect of the watch, another sensation to be observed and accepted, and you find that it deepens your sense of stillness, your body having settled into a slow, energy-conserving mode that requires little movement and produces little heat, a state of quiet, patient endurance that feels ancient and natural, like the dormant trees and the sleeping animals and the frozen, silent earth. As the cold deepens, a new phenomenon begins to manifest itself, so gradually that you do not notice it at first, your attention having been focused on the stars and the darkness. The dew, which began to form earlier in the night, now intensifies, the moisture in the air condensing on every cool surface, every blade of grass, every leaf, every stone, every metal fitting on your musket. You become aware of it first as a subtle, damp coolness on the brim of your hat, a thin, even coating of moisture that darkens the felt and adds a slight, extra weight to the front of the brim. And when you reach up to touch it, your fingers come away wet, the moisture cool and clean on your skin. Then you notice it on the grass beside the road, which no longer whispers in the wind, but instead glistens with 1,000 tiny droplets that catch the starlight and sparkle like a scattered handful of tiny diamonds, a faint, shimmering carpet of light that stretches away into the darkness. The road itself, which was dry and dusty earlier, now takes on a slightly darker, damper hue, the packed earth absorbing the moisture and softening at the surface. And when you shift your weight, you can feel the slight, subtle give of the ground beneath your boots, a soft, quiet squelch that is barely audible. The dew also settles on the metal parts of your musket, the barrel, and the lock and the trigger guard, all acquiring a thin, even film of moisture that beads up into tiny droplets, each one catching the starlight and holding it like a miniature liquid lens. You run a finger along the barrel, feeling the cool, wet surface and the slight, slick resistance of the water, and you wipe the moisture away absently, knowing that it will return within minutes, that the dew is a patient, persistent visitor that will not be deterred by a single stroke of a finger. The lock, with its intricate moving parts, receives the same treatment, your fingers tracing the outline of the frizzen and the pan and the flint, wiping away the moisture with a slow, careful motion that ensures the mechanism remains dry and functional, a small, habitual act of maintenance that you perform without conscious thought, your hands moving through the familiar sequence as naturally as they would clean the weapon in the armory. The world around you, now fully enveloped in the deep, moonless dark and the settling dew, seems to hold its breath, the silence becoming even more profound than before, a silence so complete that you can hear the soft, distant sound of your own heartbeat, a low, steady thump that pulses in your ears and seems to synchronize with the slow, rhythmic dripping of the dew from the leaves of the hedge. The insects have fallen completely silent now, their small, cold bodies incapable of producing the energy needed for their nightly chorus, and the brook, which was a constant, murmuring presence earlier, seems quieter too, its voice muffled by the cold and the darkness, or perhaps your ears have simply grown so accustomed to it that it has become part of the silence itself, a silence that is not empty but filled with a deep, resonant potential, a stillness that seems to be waiting for something, though you do not know what that something might be. You stand at the center of this profound, expectant stillness, your body cool and still, your mind quiet and empty, and you feel a deep, wordless connection to the world around you, a sense that you are not merely witnessing the night, but are participating in it, that your stillness is part of the world's stillness, your patience part of the world's patience, your waiting part of the world's waiting. The darkness before dawn is not a time of fear or uncertainty, but a time of deep, abiding peace, a time when the old tired day has completely passed and the new day has not yet begun, a liminal, suspended hour when time itself seems to hold its breath, and you hold yours with it, your breathing so slow and so shallow that it barely disturbs the air, your body so still that you might be mistaken for a statue or a tree or a part of the earth itself. In the eastern sky, so faint and so subtle that you are not certain you really see it, a change begins to manifest, a slight, barely perceptible lightening of the horizon that might be the first hint of the dawn or might be a trick of your dark, adapted eyes, a wishful illusion conjured by the cold and the stillness and the deep, quiet longing for the return of the light. You watch the eastern horizon with a calm, patient gaze, not expecting anything, not hoping for anything, simply observing, and you note that the blackness there is no longer absolute, that it has taken on a faint, deep blue tone that is almost indistinguishable from black, but is, when you look carefully, just slightly lighter, just slightly softer, the first tentative suggestion of the day that will eventually arrive. This change is so gradual that it will be many hours before any real light appears, and you know this, and you accept it, settling even more deeply into your stillness, your eyes fixed on the distant dark line where the earth meets the sky, your breath forming soft white clouds in the cold air, your body and mind perfectly, profoundly at peace in the deep, quiet, dewy darkness before the dawn. The first hint of the coming change arrives not as a sound or a sight, but as a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the quality of the darkness itself, a gradual thinning of the blackness that has held the world in its deep, quiet embrace for so many hours. You have been watching the eastern horizon with a calm, patient attention, your eyes tracing the faint, barely visible line where the earth meets the sky, and over the course of many slow, unhurried minutes you become aware that the line is no longer as sharp as it was, that the blackness there has begun to soften, to dilute, as if a single drop of pale grey water has been added to a vast, dark pool. The change is so slight at first that you cannot be certain it is real, but as you continue to watch, your breath forming soft, white clouds in the cold air, the softening becomes undeniable, a gradual, gentle lightening that spreads along the horizon and then upward, slowly, patiently, like a slow grey tide rising from the earth. The stars in that part of the sky which have been shining with their cold, brilliant light all night begin to fade, their points of light dissolving one by one into the growing greyness, and you watch this process with the same quiet, accepting attention that you have given to everything else this night, knowing that the dawn is still some time away, but that its first faint messengers have arrived. The grey light, as it grows, begins to define the edges of things, the shapes that have been hidden in the deep darkness now emerging from the blackness as soft, indistinct outlines, like images slowly forming on a piece of paper held near a flame. The signpost, which has been your silent companion through the long hours, is the first object to reveal itself, its familiar silhouette materializing against the lightening sky. A dark, vertical line with a shorter, horizontal crosspiece, its proportions gradually filling in as the light increases, the rough texture of the wood still invisible, but the overall form now clear and unmistakable. The hedge follows, its dense, tangled mass taking shape as a long, dark stripe against the grey field beyond. And then the lone tree, its branches spreading out in a delicate, intricate pattern that seems to draw itself in black ink against the pale grey canvas of the sky. The road, too, emerges from the darkness, its surface a pale, muted grey that contrasts with the darker verges, and you can see the ruts and the stones and the small, scattered puddles that the dew has left, each one reflecting the grey sky with a faint, silvery sheen. The world is still monochrome, still muted, still quiet, but it is no longer hidden, and you find a quiet comfort in the return of these familiar shapes, a sense that the night is gently, patiently handing the world back to the day. With the growing light comes a new awareness of the cold, the deepest, most penetrating cold of the entire night, a chill that seems to rise from the ground and press down from the sky at the same time, wrapping you in a cool, heavy blanket that settles into your bones. You feel it most keenly in your feet, which have been standing on the cold earth for so many hours, the soles of your boots transmitting the chill upward through the leather and the wool, and you shift your weight slightly, flexing your toes inside the boots to encourage the circulation, a small automatic movement that you have performed many times before. Your hands, still gripping the musket, have grown stiff and somewhat clumsy, the fingers slow to respond, and you flex them too, curling and uncurling them with a deliberate, gentle motion that sends small, tingling waves of returning warmth through the joints. The cold is not painful. It is simply a presence, a quiet, insistent reminder of the hour and the season, and you accept it as you have accepted everything else, without resistance, without complaint. Your breath, which you have been watching on and off throughout the night, now forms substantial clouds of vapor that billow out in front of you and linger in the still air, their edges softening and diffusing before they fade, and you find yourself paying attention to the rhythm of your breathing, the slow, steady cycle of inhalation and exhalation that has been your quiet companion through the long hours. The cold air enters your lungs with a sharp, clean freshness that is almost invigorating, and you draw it in deeply, feeling it spread through your chest, before releasing it in a long, slow exhale that sends another cloud of vapor rolling outward into the grey light. This simple, rhythmic act is deeply grounding, a connection between your body and the cold, awakening world, and you continue it as you stand and wait, knowing that the time for the change is drawing near. And then, as the grey light continues to strengthen and the shapes of the world become more distinct, you hear the sound that you have been awaiting, without urgency, without impatience, the sound that marks the approaching end of your vigil, the slow, regular footsteps of your relief coming along the road from the direction of the barracks. The sound is faint at first, a soft, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch that drifts through the cold, still air, its source still hidden by the distance and the lingering darkness, but it is unmistakable, a human footfall on the packed earth, deliberate and unhurried, each step placed with the same calm, measured precision that you have used in your own patrols. You turn your head slightly, orienting your ears toward the west, and you listen, letting the sound grow gradually louder as the footsteps draw nearer, the rhythm steady and unvarying, a slow, patient cadence that speaks of a man who is in no hurry, who knows exactly where he is going and exactly how long it will take to get there. The footsteps are accompanied after a while by other softer sounds, the faint, gentle creak of leather that you recognize as the flexing of a crossbelt, the slight metallic jingle of a powder flask or a buckle, the soft, rhythmic swish of a wool cassock brushing against itself with each step, all of these sounds blending together into a quiet, familiar symphony of approach that you have heard many times before, on other mornings, at the end of other watches. You do not move from your post, you simply stand and wait, your eyes fixed on the point where the road emerges from the grey distance, and you feel a quiet, inward sense of completion. A calm, satisfying awareness that the night is ending as it should, that the rhythm of the watch is about to turn, that the continuity of the guard will be maintained. The figure of your relief emerges from the greyness slowly, by degrees, a dark, moving shape that gradually resolves into the familiar outline of a musketeer, his blue cassock appearing first as a dark, indistinct blur and then sharpening into focus, the silver cross on his tabard catching the faint grey light and gleaming with a soft, muted brilliance, the long musket resting on his shoulder at the same angle that you have held yours all night. He wears the same wide-brimmed hat, with its white plume stirring gently in the cold air, the same heavy boots that make the same soft, crunching sound on the road, the same crossbelt and sidearm and powder flask, and he walks with the same slow, steady, unhurried gait that you have walked on your own small patrols, his head slightly lowered against the chill, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He is a man you know, a fellow musketeer whose name and face are as familiar to you as your own, and you watch his approach with a quiet, wordless welcome, a sense of calm recognition that needs no expression. When he is perhaps 20 paces away, he raises his head and meets your eyes, and a silent acknowledgement passes between you, a brief, mutual recognition that requires no words, no gestures, only the simple, shared understanding of two men who have stood this watch before and will stand it again. He closes the remaining distance with the same slow, steady steps, his boots crunching softly on the gravel, and then he stops a few paces from you, his musket lowering from his shoulder to rest beside him in a motion that exactly mirrors your own, his breath forming clouds of vapor that mingle with yours in the cold grey air. For a moment, the two of you simply stand there, facing each other in the quiet grey dawn, two dark, still figures at the center of the awakening world. And then he speaks, his voice low and calm, a quiet murmur that blends with the rustle of the breeze through the grass. All is quiet, he says, and nothing has stirred on the road since the last cart passed an hour before sunset. The words are the same words that the previous guard spoke to you when you arrived, the same quiet, formulaic report that has been passed from one musketeer to the next for as long as anyone can remember, and you accept them with a slight, slow nod, your own voice, when you reply, emerging as a low, calm murmur that carries the accumulated stillness of the long night. All is quiet, you repeat, and nothing has stirred, the words feeling solid and true in your mouth, a simple, unadorned statement of fact that sums up the entirety of your vigil, all the long, slow hours of watching and listening and waiting condensed into a single, peaceful sentence. The two of you stand in silence for a moment longer, the grey light brightening around you, the world slowly taking on its daytime colors, and then the quiet ritual of the change continues, the small, precise actions that transfer the responsibility of the watch from one man to the next. You take a single step back from the center of the crossroads, your boots shifting on the packed earth with a soft, gravelly sound, and you feel the weight of the post lift from your shoulders. Not a physical weight, but a quiet, internal one. A subtle, almost imperceptible release of the vigilance that has held you upright and still through the long, dark hours. The relief steps forward into the space you have vacated, his feet settling into the same slight, worn depression in the road that your own feet have occupied for so long, his posture adjusting with a slow, automatic precision until he stands exactly as you stood, his musket resting at the same angle, his eyes scanning the road with the same calm, steady attention. You watch him for a moment, this new guardian of the crossroads, and you see that he is already settling into the stillness, his breathing slowing, his gaze softening, his whole body entering the same quiet, patient state that has sustained you through the night, and you know that the post is in good hands, that the continuity of the guard is unbroken, that the road will continue to be watched with the same calm, faithful attention that you have given it. You turn, slowly, and begin to walk away, your steps falling into the same slow, steady rhythm that you have used all night, a rhythm that now carries you eastward along the King's Road toward the distant, unseen barracks. The gravel crunches under your boots with a soft, familiar sound. A sound that seems louder now in the quiet of the early morning, each footfall a distinct, isolated event that marks the passage of your body through the cold grey air. You do not look back. You do not need to, because you know exactly what you would see. A solitary musketeer standing at the center of the crossroads, his musket resting beside him, his blue cassock dark against the lightening sky, his plumes stirring gently in the breeze, a still, silent figure who is now the guardian of the road. Just as you were, just as others will be after him. The image is so clear and so familiar that it is almost like a picture painted in your mind, and you carry it with you as you walk, a quiet, comforting presence that accompanies you along the road. The grey light continues to strengthen as you walk, the eastern sky now taking on a faint, pearly quality, a soft, luminous white that spreads upward from the horizon and slowly, gradually pushes back the remaining darkness. The stars have all but disappeared now, only the very brightest still visible. Small faint points of light that cling to the fading night like the last, lingering notes of a song that has almost ended, and the great celestial river has dissolved into the pale grey-blue expanse, its millions of stars hidden by the growing light. The moon is long gone, the western horizon holding no trace of its passage, only the same soft grey emptiness that fills the rest of the sky, and you find that you do not miss it, that the return of the light brings its own quiet beauty, a gentle, diffuse radiance that illuminates the world without harshness, without shadow. The road ahead of you, which you have watched for so many hours from a fixed stationary point, now unfolds before you as a long, pale ribbon that curves gently between the dark winter-bare fields, its surface marked by the same ruts and stones and small dew-filled puddles that you observed from your post, but now seen from a moving perspective, the details shifting and changing as you walk, new stones and new ruts appearing while old ones recede behind you. The grasses on either side of the road are still heavy with dew, their blades bent under the weight of the moisture, and they glisten with a faint, silvery sheen as the grey light catches the droplets, a subtle, shimmering carpet that stretches away on both sides until it merges with the distant, misty horizon. The hedge, which you saw as a dark, solid mass during the night, now reveals its individual leaves and branches, the intricate tangled structure of twigs and thorns and dry brown leaves that remains from the previous autumn, and you can see the small dark shapes of birds beginning to stir within it, their soft, sleepy chirps breaking the silence with tentative, questioning notes. A single bird sings from the top of the lone tree, a clear, pure note that rises into the grey air and hangs there for a moment before fading, a sound so simple and so beautiful that it seems to capture the entire essence of the early morning, the quiet, hopeful beginning of a new day. You listen to it as you walk, letting the note echo in your awareness, and then, after a long pause, the bird sings again, the same note, but with a slight variation, a tiny, delicate trill at the end that adds a new, subtle layer of complexity, and you find yourself smiling, a small, inward smile that is more a feeling than an expression, a quiet, private acknowledgement of the simple, unassuming beauty of the world. Other birds, awakened by the first singer, begin to add their own voices to the chorus, a soft, scattered symphony of chirps and trills and warbles that rises from the hedgerows and the fields, a gentle, fragmented music that seems to celebrate the return of the light without urgency, without fanfare, simply because the light has returned and the night has passed, and the world continues on its slow, steady, peaceful way. Your body, which has been still for so long, now settles into the rhythm of walking with a quiet, natural ease. Your legs moving with a slow, steady, automatic motion that requires no thought, your arms swinging gently at your sides, the musket resting on your shoulder at a comfortable, familiar angle. The crossbelt still presses against your chest with the same gentle, even pressure, and the rapier still swings softly at your hip, and the hat still rests on your head with its familiar, grounding weight. All the equipment and clothing that you catalogued so carefully during the night, now moving with you, a part of you, a quiet, constant presence that accompanies you along the road. You feel the cool, morning air on your face, fresher and cleaner than the night air, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth and awakening vegetation and the distant, clean smell of the forest. And you breathe it in deeply, filling your lungs with the new day, feeling the last, lingering traces of the night's stillness, slowly, gently releasing their hold on your mind and body. The road ahead eventually reveals the first, distant outlines of the barracks, a low, grey shape that sits at the edge of the village, its slate roof catching the grey light and gleaming with a soft, muted sheen, its chimneys releasing thin, lazy columns of smoke that rise straight up into the still air before dispersing, and you know that behind those walls the morning routines are already beginning. The quiet, orderly rituals of rising and washing and preparing for the day that you have described so carefully in your own mind. You will join them soon, but not yet, for now you are still walking, still moving through the quiet, grey morning, still carrying the peaceful, silent essence of the night within you, a calm, enduring stillness that will stay with you long after you have reached the barracks and cleaned your musket and laid your head down to rest. Behind you, unseen but perfectly present, the new guard stands at the crossroads, his eyes on the road, his musket at his side, his breath forming soft, white clouds in the cold, grey air, and the continuity of the watch, the quiet, unbroken chain of vigilance and stillness and peace, continues without interruption, as it has for years, as it will for years to come. The walk back to the barracks unfolds at the same unhurried pace that has governed every action of your long watch, your boots meeting the road with a soft, steady rhythm that feels as natural as breathing, each step carrying you further from the crossroads and closer to the quiet rest that awaits. The grey dawn continues to brighten around you, the eastern sky now washed in a pale, pearlescent light that seems to rise from the earth itself, a soft, diffuse radiance that fills the air and gentles every outline, every shape, every subtle detail of the waking countryside. The road, which you watched for so many hours from a single, fixed point, now unrolls before you like a familiar, well-worn ribbon. Its surface pale and damp from the night's dew, the dust settled and the ruts softened, and you follow its gentle curves with the easy, automatic attention of a man who has walked this path countless times, whose feet know every stone and every hollow, whose body moves through the landscape as naturally as water moves through a stream. The fields on either side of the road emerge slowly from the receding darkness, their winter-bare surfaces taking on a muted, silvery-green hue. As the light increases, the grass is heavy and glistening with droplets that catch the pale dawn glow and scatter it into tiny, fleeting rainbows. A quiet, shimmering beauty that exists for only a moment before the angle of the light changes and the colors dissolve back into gray. The hedgerows, which were dark, impenetrable masses during the night, now reveal their intricate architecture of twigs and branches, the dry brown leaves of the previous autumn still clinging here and there, trembling slightly in the faint morning breeze, and within their depths the birds are growing bolder, their sleepy chirps giving way to more sustained, melodic calls that weave together into a gentle, scattered chorus, a soft, welcoming symphony that seems to greet the new day without haste, without like. A blackbird lands on a fence post a few paces ahead of you, its glossy feathers catching the light with a dark, iridescent sheen, and it watches you pass with a bright, curious eye before flying off with a sudden, low whir of wings, a brief, graceful interruption that fades as quickly as it came. You continue walking, your pace unhurried, your breathing deep and even, the cool morning air filling your lungs with a clean, fresh sharpness that washes away the last, lingering heaviness of the night. A subtle, invigorating clarity that sharpens your senses without disturbing your calm. The cold is still present, a crisp, penetrating chill that nips at your cheeks and the tips of your ears. But it is a morning cold, a cold that carries the promise of the sun, and you can feel the first faint warmth beginning to stir behind the grey clouds, a gentle, distant heat that will strengthen as the hours pass. Your breath continues to form soft, white clouds of vapor, but they are smaller now, less dense, dissipating more quickly in the brightening air. and you watch them with the same detached, quiet interest that has accompanied everything else, noting how they seem to be the last visible traces of the night's deep stillness, leaving your body. A slow, gentle exhalation of all the long dark hours that are now behind you. The distant barracks, which you first glimpsed as a low grey shape on the horizon, now grows more distinct with each step, its familiar outline resolving into the solid, reassuring presence of home. A long stone building with a steep slate roof and a row of small square windows that are still dark, their occupants not yet risen, the quiet routines of the morning only just beginning to stir within. A single column of smoke rises from the kitchen chimney, thin and pale against the grey sky, its scent drifting toward you on the faint breeze, a soft, woody fragrance that mingles with the clean smell of the damp earth and the distant, resinous aroma of the forest. A quiet, comforting signal that the fires have been lit, that the water is heating, that the day's first meal is being prepared, with the same slow, steady care that defines everything in this place. The stone walls of the barracks, which have stood for generations, are darkened with age and patched here and there with lighter stone where repairs have been made, and a faint greenish patina of moss softens the lower edges. A quiet testament to the slow, patient passage of time, to the countless seasons of rain and sun and frost that have shaped this building into its present, enduring form. The courtyard gate is open as always, its iron hinges having swung inward at some early hour to admit the morning's first movements, and you pass through it without pause, your boots now sounding on the worn flagstones with a softer, more muted tread, the sound absorbed by the surrounding walls and the high, open sky. The courtyard itself is still and quiet, the flagstones damp and dark with dew, the clumps of lavender and rosemary beside the low stone wall releasing their fragrance as you brush past, a subtle herbal scent that rises into the cool air and lingers behind you, a quiet, aromatic welcome that you have come to associate with the end of a watch and the beginning of rest. The bench where you sometimes sit in the afternoon sun is empty, its wooden slats dark with moisture, and the small stone-rimmed well in the corner stands silent, its bucket hanging motionless on its rope, a still, patient presence that will soon be disturbed by the morning's water drawing. Everything in the courtyard is exactly as it should be, orderly and familiar and deeply, quietly peaceful, and you cross it with the same slow, steady pace, your body already beginning to anticipate the warmth and the stillness of the interior. The heavy wooden door that leads into the barracks swings open under your hand with a soft, low groan of its iron hinges, a sound you have heard 1,000 times, a sound that is as familiar as your own heartbeat, and you step inside, the cooler air of the interior washing over you, carrying the faint blended scents of old wood and wool, and the clean, sharp smell of the lye soap that is used to scrub the floors. The corridor beyond the door is dim and quiet, its stone walls lined with wooden pegs from which hang cloaks and hats, and the occasional spare crossbelt, and the only light comes from a single small window at the far end, its grey illumination barely penetrating the shadows, a soft, diffuse glow that is more suggestion than light. Your boots, which sounded so clearly on the road and the flagstones, now fall almost silently on the smooth, worn floorboards, the wood having been polished by generations of feet until it gleams with a dark, subdued sheen, and you walk with a quiet, careful tread, mindful of the men who are still sleeping in the rooms on either side, that breathing a soft, collective murmur that rises and falls behind the closed doors. The sleeping quarters, when you enter them, are exactly as you pictured them during the deep hours of the night, a long, peaceful room filled with a gentle sound of rest, the 2 rows of iron beds each holding a still, blanket-covered form, the early grey light filtering through the high windows and casting faint, pale rectangles on the wooden floor. The air is warm here, warmer than the outside, warmed by the collective body heat of the sleeping men and the residual warmth of the building itself, and you feel the difference immediately, a soft, enveloping heat that begins to ease the chill from your skin, that makes your eyelids heavy and your movement slow. The other musketeers are still deep in their slumber, their faces peaceful and relaxed, their breathing slow and even, and you move among them with the quiet, practiced stealth of someone who has returned from many night watches, stepping carefully around the edges of the beds, avoiding the boards that creak, making your way to your own familiar corner with the calm, automatic ease of long habit. Your bed, the third from the end on the left side near the window, is exactly as you left it, the blanket folded with precise, square corners, the pillow slightly flattened, but still inviting, the wooden chest beside it closed and blocked, its iron fittings dark against the pale wood. You stand beside the bed for a moment, your musket still resting on your shoulder, your body still carrying the weight of the uniform and the equipment, and you feel the accumulated stillness of the long night settling into your bones, a profound, deep weariness that is not unpleasant, but is simply the natural, expected result of the hours you have spent awake and watchful. The thought of rest, of lying down and closing your eyes and letting go of the vigilance that has held you upright since dusk, is almost overwhelming in its quiet, gentle appeal. But there is a small, final task that remains, a task that is as much a part of the rhythm as the watch itself, and you turn away from the bed with a slow, reluctant sigh and make your way back out of the sleeping quarters toward the armory, where the muskets are cleaned and stored. The armory, at this early hour, is empty and still, the rows of wooden racks lining the walls standing in silent, patient order, the muskets already stored there gleaming faintly in the grey light that comes through the single, high window, their barrels and locks lightly oiled, their stocks dark with age and use. The familiar smell of gun oil and old powder and seasoned wood greets you as you enter, a smell that you have come to associate with calm, methodical work, with the quiet, repetitive motions of cleaning and maintenance, and you feel a small inward sense of comfort at its presence, a reassurance that the world is still orderly, that the simple, necessary tasks of care and preservation continue. You take a seat on one of the low wooden stools that are arranged along the workbench, your movements slow and deliberate, your body heavy with approaching sleep, and you lay your musket across your knees with the same careful, practiced motion that you have used 1,000 times before, the wood of the stock cool against your palms, the metal of the barrel cold and slightly damp from the night air. The cleaning process unfolds with a slow, rhythmic, almost ritualistic quality, your hands moving through the familiar sequence without haste, without thought, as if they belong to someone else, someone who is already half asleep and dreaming of rest. You begin with the barrel, running a lightly oiled cloth through the bore with the help of the ramrod, the cloth emerging with a faint dark smudge of residue that is barely visible, the weapon having not been fired since its last cleaning, and you repeat the motion several times, the ramrod sliding in and out with a soft whispering sound, until the cloth comes away clean and out with a faint oily sheen. The lock receives your attention next, your fingers moving over the frizzen and the pan, and the flint with a gentle, precise touch, wiping away the tiny specks of dust and the thin film of dew that accumulated during the night, each part inspected and cleaned and lightly oiled until the metal shines with a dark, subdued luster, the flint still sharp, the springs still strong, everything in its proper order. The stock you wipe down with a slightly damp cloth to remove the dust, and then you buff it with a dry rag, your hands moving in slow, circular motions that seem to take forever, the wood warming under your touch, the grain of the walnut glowing with a deep, rich, almost liquid sheen, a reflection of the years of care that have gone into its preservation. When the musket is clean and dry and gleaming, you rise from the stool with a slow, heavy motion, your legs stiff from the long hours of standing, and you carry the weapon to its designated slot in the rack, a narrow, padded space that is exactly the right size, exactly the right shape, the wood of the rack worn smooth from the countless times the musket has been placed there and removed. You slide the weapon into its place with a soft, final click, the butt settling onto the stone floor, the barrel leaning against the padded rail, and you stand back for a moment, looking at it. A simple, functional object that has been your companion through the night, now returned to its rest, its work done, its vigil ended. The other muskets in the rack stand in silent, orderly rows beside it, their barrels aligned in a perfect, unbroken line, their stocks dark and solid, their locks gleaming faintly, and the sight of them, so orderly and so calm, fills you with a quiet, unspoken satisfaction, a sense that everything is as it should be, that the long, slow cycle of care and watchfulness continues uninterrupted. The tabard, which you have worn over your cassock throughout the night, is the next item to be removed, and you unfasten it with slow, wary fingers, the silver embroidered cross.